Chapter 1. The Duel of Honorlate. October in London carried a crisp edge that seemed to sharpen the senses, and as I hurried along Pall Mall toward White's Club, the chill wind rustled the fallen leaves in a brusque accompaniment. My old friend, Hercule Poirot, had summoned me by telegram the previous evening, requesting my company for a most peculiar engagement. An afternoon of genteel conversation that promised to culminate in a duel. I confess that the notion of duelling in the year 1925 struck me as an anachronism, yet with Poirot one learns never to dismiss the unusual. I arrived at the club's polished mahogany doors precisely at 1 o'clock. Poirot, ever punctual, awaited me in the card-room, his waxed moustaches curved in anticipation. He wore a dark frock coat with a lavender tie, and his black patent shoes gleamed under the gaslights. "Hastings," he greeted, beckoning me into a secluded alcove. "We are to meet two dukes today, both esteemed, yet recently at odds. It would appear that honour, like the letter opener in our last case, conceals a deeper secret." I seated myself across from him and poured us each a glass of iced champagne. "Duelling dukes, mon ami, surely the challenge will be a mere formality, a symbolic exchange of apologies over coffee." Poirot shook his head gravely. "On the contrary, I have learned from an anonymous note, sainted by no signature, that one of them intends mortal combat at dawn, tomorrow in the moors outside Ashbury Court." "A real duel?" I exclaimed, setting down my glass. "With pistols at dawn?" Poirot nodded, drinking his champagne in a single, precise sip. "Thus, the affair presents both a matter of urgent danger and a puzzle of provenance. Who wishes bloodshed between these noble houses? And, most pressing, have we time to prevent a tragedy?" At 2 o'clock we repaired to the club's library, where a brass clock ticked insistently. There we found Lord Sebastian Grosvenor, Duke of Ashbury, a tall man with silver-streaked hair and a hawkish profile, seated beside a low table. Opposite him, the Duke of Beaumont, Lord Alistair Blackwood, a gentleman of athletic build, russet moustache, and eyes that glittered like flint. Both rose as we entered, their cordial bows belying palpable tension. "Messieurs," Poirot began, "I trust you will forgive my intrusion into your private council, but circumstances compel me to hear your views." He addressed Ashbury first. "Your Grace, might you explain the nature of your dispute with Lord Blackwood?" The older Duke's face darkened. "Monsieur Poirot, it is a matter of family honour. My cousin Beaumont insinuated that the Ashbury line profited from a wartime contract, one that cost British lives. He refused my apology." He turned to Beaumont. "You demanded satisfaction, Alistair?" Beaumont inclined his head, voice low. "I did, Sebastian. The accusation against your family is grave. Until it is withdrawn, and retraction penned in reputable journals, I shall accept no peace." The two dukes glared at one another, the atmosphere crackling with unspent animosity. Poirot stroked his moustaches thoughtfully. "And the duel's conditions: pistols at 6 a.m., 10 paces, standard practice. Yet, Your Grace, you had no legal recourse. You could have sought arbitration." Ashbury's lips tightened. "Arbitration cannot rectify slander that sullies ancestral legacy. Public honour demands private redress." He looked to Beaumont. "Do you agree?" Beaumont's reply was curt. I have offered you the chance to apologize. You refused. I intervened, voice diplomatic. Gentlemen, if I may, a duel is lethal. Could we not explore reconciliation? An exchange of statements in the Times. Beaumont snorted. I will confess nothing until I see proof of wrongdoing by Ashbury Industries. Retractions cost more than half the fortune fought over here. He tapped his waistcoat pocket. And I shall not be robbed of my dignity. Poirot's eyes flicked to me. Hastings, note how financial pride intertwines with honour. This dispute is not death or disgrace alone, but money and legacy. If we can uncover evidence of that wartime contract, we may unravel the motive for such enmity and prevent bloodshed. He rose and beckoned the dukes to follow him into the adjoining reading room. I trailed behind, heart fluttering. Within, Poirot produced the anonymous note he had received, a sheet of cream paper bearing the words, 2 dukes, 1 wrong, 1 duel. Prevent the shot, Monsieur Poirot, lest history stain new graves. Beaumont's brow furrowed. Who would seek to orchestrate this conflict? Ashbury dismissed the suggestion. No one outside our houses has interest enough in our personal feud. Poirot folded the note. On the contrary, a third party may profit from your blood feud, perhaps a rival industrialist, a political foe, or a descendant of one who perished. We must investigate the records of Ashbury Industries and the War Office contracts. He turned to Beaumont. Your Grace, you claimed evidence of misappropriation. Have you obtained any documents? Beaumont grimaced. I have a ledger, snatched from your home papers by a confidential inquiry agent. It shows payments diverted from government coffers. He hesitated. But I cannot be certain of its authenticity. Poirot's little grey cells whirred. Forgery is common in matters of slander. Hastings, fetch my case to Ashbury Court tomorrow. I shall examine the ledger's binding and ink composition. He addressed both dukes. I propose that you suspend the duel until this ledger is examined. If it proves genuine, then your Grace must deliver reparation. If false, Lord Beaumont must retract and apologize. Will you agree? Both men exchanged a wary glance. Beaumont's shoulders sagged. I will, if you guarantee impartial investigation. Ashbury nodded. Agreed. Poirot smiled, though his moustaches quivered with determination. By close of business, Poirot had dispatched telegrams to the War Office, to his antiquarian friend who specialized in document analysis, and to a forensic ink examiner. We shall convene at Ashbury Court at dawn, he told the dukes, but you may rest assured no one shall be harmed. That evening, Poirot and I retired to his lodgings. I poured tea as he perused architectural plans of Ashbury Court. We stand upon a fulcrum, Hastings, he remarked. 1 false note, and the duel proceeds. 1 truth revealed, and peace is restored. I settled into a chair. Have you any suspicion of who might profit from this enmity? Poirot closed the plans with a tap. There is a shadow over Beaumont's investments. 1 Grafton & Co.'s, a firm who stands to gain lucrative contracts if Ashbury Industries falls. I suspect their hand. He rose and donned his coat. Come, Hastings, to Ashbury Court at dawn. We must be there before the coaches. The fate of 2 dukes, and perhaps more, depends upon our little grey cells. I followed him into the foggy London night, the promise of dawn's revelation lighting my way. The affair of the duelling dukes had begun, and I sensed that behind the veneer of honour lay a darker intrigue, one that Hercule Poirot would unravel with all the elegance of his famed deduction. Chapter 2. The gathering at Ashbury Court of first pale light of dawn crept across the high road as Hercule Poirot and I descended from our hired phaeton before the wrought-iron gates of Ashbury Court. A thin mist lay over the adjacent fields, blurring the outline of the manor's turrets and mullioned windows until they seemed to hover like spectres at the margin of vision. It was 6:30 by the coachman's watch, an hour at which honest folk still slumbered. Yet here we were, summoned not by pleasure, but by potential tragedy. Poirot stepped forward, planting his well-shined boots firmly on the gravel. He removed his bowler hat and surveyed the silent facade. "Hastings," he observed softly, "we walk upon the brink of misfortune. If this ledger is genuine, a duel may yet wait upon honour. If false, then two men's reputations have been besmirched for but one party's gain." I nodded, drawing my coat closer against the chill. "Shall we give the summons?" Poirot drew from his waistcoat pocket a slender silver whistle. He raised it to his lips and emitted 3 precise silvery notes. Moments later, the great doors swung inward to admit us, and from the depths of the oak-panelled hall came the measured footfalls of Ashbury Court's butler, Mr. Whitbourne. "Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings," the butler greeted, bowing with military precision. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashbury, awaits you in the library. The ledger lies upon the oak table at its centre." We followed him through corridors hung with ancestral portraits, each watching us as though aghast at being roused so early. At length we reached the library, a capacious chamber lined with leather-backed tomes. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, illuminating a heavy mahogany table upon which lay a single folio, the disputed ledger, and 2 small glass phials labelled Ink Sample A and Ink Sample B. Ashbury, holding a lantern, aloft, stood beside the table. His noble countenance was drawn with anxiety. "Monsieur Poirot," he intoned, "I thank you for coming so promptly. I trust you will examine this ledger and render judgment on its authenticity." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "Your Grace, I shall proceed with all due care. But first, might I ask your permission to secure this room until we complete our examination?" Ashbury nodded. "Of course. Mr. Whitbourne will admit no one." The butler closed and bolted the doors behind us. Poirot removed from his coat a small travelling case containing magnifying lenses, chemical reagents, and a notebook. He lifted the ledger and held it to the lantern's glow. "Note, Hastings, how the paper bears the watermark of Ashbury Industries Stationery, but see how the watermark edges are blurred, as though applied after manufacture." He set the ledger on a sheet of clean blotting paper and produced his loop. With delicate precision he inspected the binding spine. "This sewing thread," he murmured, tracing the stitches, "is slightly coarser than that used by Ashbury Court's binders in 1916. Inconsistency here suggests a recent rebinding, possibly to insert fresh pages." I leaned forward, peering at the fine stitches. So, someone removed the original binding, replaced it with one of coarser thread, and thus introduced forged pages. "Precisely, mon ami." Poirot laid a gentle finger along a line of figures. "Observe, too, the ink's sheen. It lacks the iron gall composition of wartime documents. Let us test it against the files provided." He picked up ink sample A and dipped a fine brush into the pale brown solution, applying a small drop to the ledger's margin. He watched as the ink spread slowly. He then dipped the brush in ink sample B, a darker, richer brown, and titrated a second drop at the ledger's edge. Ink A is identical in composition to the ledger's text, modern aniline dye, whereas ink B, provided by Ashbury Court's archives, demonstrates the rapid oxidation and slight purpling characteristic of period iron gall. Ashbury's face paled. So the entries are forgeries, written at earliest within the last 3 years. Poirot pocketed his loupe. Undeniably so, but we must determine by whom. He closed the ledger gently and returned it to the table. "Hastings, secure this book in the inner strong room, and summon Lord Beaumont and Mr. Faraday of Grafton and Co., whom we suspect to be involved." He turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, might we have a moment alone with you?" Ashbury inclined. His head and Poirot and I escorted him to a set of window seats. Once Ashbury was seated, Poirot spoke in a low voice. "Your Grace, this ledger's forgery has been carried out by a practised hand, one who knew to mimic Ashbury Industries' watermark, and to provide forged pages of a ledger bound before Captain Farnsworth's death. Who among your circle had such skill and motive?" Ashbury hesitated, brow furrowed. "My cousin Beaumont has no such talent, but Mr. Cornelius Faraday of Grafton and Co. boasts a small printing works and binds his own ledgers. He stands to undercut my industry by 15% in colonial markets." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then Faraday may be our suspect. We shall confront him. Meanwhile, summon Lord Beaumont to witness the ledger's falsification. He has been misled by this forgery. Justice demands he know the truth." Ashbury nodded. "Very well." He pressed a bell call. "Mr. Whitbourne, fetch Lord Beaumont and Mr. Faraday at once, if you please." Within minutes the door opened to admit Beaumont, his russet moustache bristling with surprise, and Faraday, a slightly built man with ink-stained fingers and a calculating gaze. Both gentlemen bowed stiffly. Poirot wasted no time. "Gentlemen, we have concluded that this ledger is a forgery. How do you explain the aniline ink and the modern binding thread?" Beaumont's face drained of colour. "A forgery," he echoed. "Monsieur Poirot, I cannot believe it." Faraday's lips twitched. "Surely you see, Beaumont, that whoever procured this ledger wished to implicate Ashbury Industries in profiteering. The question is, who benefits?" Poirot pointed an unerring finger at Faraday. "Mr. Faraday, your firm stands to gain if Ashbury Industries falters. You possess a bindery, local printers, and motive to pin this scandal upon the Duke. Did you author these false entries?" Faraday's composure cracked. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small black notebook, its corners worn. "Monsieur Poirot, I confess, between us only in regret, I arranged for this ledger to be created. I engaged a forger in London who supplied the ledger, which I introduced into the Duke's archives through a confidential agent. My aim was to force a merger on more favourable terms, not to incite a fatal duel." Beaumont gaped. "You, Faraday!" bowed his head in shame. "I panicked when these two houses refused negotiation. I never intended violence, and certainly not to injure either Duke." Poirot folded his hands. "Yet you orchestrated a scheme both dishonourable and dangerous. You have caused false accusations, fractured family honour, and brought two gentlemen to the brink of mortal combat. You shall face the consequences in court." Ashbury rose, dignity tempered by severity. "Mr. Faraday, you shall have no leniency from me. I withdraw all negotiations with Grafton & Co., and I will see you prosecuted." Beaumont stepped forward and grasped Ashbury's hand. "My cousin, I apologize for doubting your honour. Will you suspend the duel and consider arbitration once more, now that we share the truth?" Ashbury studied Beaumont for a moment, then inclined his head. "I shall. The duel is off. Let us publish a joint statement in the Times to correct the record." Poirot bowed to both. "Excellent. Let the scales of honour revert to reason." He turned to Faraday. "As for you, sir, I shall inform Inspector Bannister. Your case is one of conspiracy, forgery, and incitement. Your motive may have been profit, but you will answer for your crimes. Defeated." Faraday nodded and surrendered his notebook. Beaumont added a firm pat to his shoulder. "You will pay in court," he said, "but I hope you find the chance to redeem yourself in service if you can." Within the hour, Mr. Whitbourne delivered the ledger once more, this time to be copied for the columns of the Times, accompanied by a joint letter from the two dukes requesting calm and offering apologies. By midday, London's newspapers bore the headline, "Duelling Dukes' Dispute Averted. Ashbury Industries exonerated. Grafton & Co. under investigation." I found Poirot in the stables, inspecting the hoofs of his beloved mare, Blanche. He looked up, moustaches quivering with satisfaction. "Hastings, note how swiftly honour yields to truth once deception is exposed. The duel, though a spectacle of tradition, is no match for the power of a forged ledger and a little grey cell." I laughed softly as Blanche neighed in welcome. "And we have prevented a needless death." He patted the mare's neck. "Indeed, mon ami. Justice, once illuminated, restores order, and spares two men from a tragedy born of slander." As we rode back toward London, the mist had lifted entirely, revealing autumn's golden fields. The duel's spectre dissolved in the clarity of evidence, and the fates of both dukes, ashamed yet reconciled, remained in their own hands, tempered by the mercy and precision of Hercule Poirot's mind. Chapter 3. The Forger's Den the Morning. After the publication of the Duke's joint statement, London stirred to the news that the duel had been averted, and Ashbury Industries thereby exonerated. Newspapers quivered with excitement, declaring Hercule Poirot the saviour of two noble houses and the champion of justice. Yet for Poirot, the affair was far from complete. He had exposed Mr. Cornelius Faraday's duplicity, but the question of the forger, the artisan who had supplied the spurious ledger, remained. Determined to follow this final thread, he bade me accompany him to a discreet address in Bloomsbury, where he believed the clandestine printing and binding had taken place. We set out from Baker Street late that morning, the autumn air clawing at our overcoats. Poirot sat beside me in the hansom cab, moustaches quivering with anticipation as he studied a visiting card upon which he had inscribed an address. Pearson & Co., 14 Argyle Street, Bloomsbury. Pearson & Co., Hastings, he said, handing me the card. a modest bindery known for rapid turnarounds on academic dissertations. But recently they have attracted a singular patron, one who is neither scholar nor gentleman. He tapped the card. Let us discover whether they have harboured our forger. At the address we found a narrow, unassuming shop front, its windows obscured by thick drapes. A brass plaque above the door proclaimed Pearson & Cour, established 1898. Poirot knocked thrice with such precision that the door opened before his fingers had fully retracted. We stepped into a cramped vestibule, where the stale scent of glue and ink hung heavy. A bespectacled clerk peered from behind a counter strewn with parchment scraps. "May I help you, gentlemen?" he inquired, voice brittle. Poirot produced his silver whistle and offered a polite bow. "Monsieur, we seek the manager of this establishment and a gentleman named Mr. Burton, who may have called last week. The clerk's eyes flickered, but his expression remained blank. "The manager is Mr. Pearson, sir. As to Mr. Burton, perhaps you might step into my office." He gestured through a side door. We followed him past racks of leather-bound volumes and shelves of calfskin sheets. The narrow corridor opened into a cramped back room, where a stout man in ink-stained coat sat behind a desk piled with order forms and receipts. Beside him stood a younger assistant, hair smudged with graphite. Poirot introduced himself and explained that the forgery of a ledger had endangered 2 dukes. "We understand," he said gently, "that this ledger may have passed through your hands." Mr. Pearson adjusted his spectacles. "Sir, we bind what clients supply. We do not question their motives." His tone was defensive but weary. Poirot nodded. Yet the quality of the binding thread in that ledger was coarser than your usual stock, and was sewn by a hand we have reason to believe is not your own. He tapped the desk. "Do you recall binding any unusual batches of documents recently?" A flicker of unease crossed Mr. Pearson's features. He exchanged a furtive glance with the assistant. "There was one consignment," he admitted at last. "A young clerk named Burton brought a pack just before closing last Friday. He insisted on using the large workshop upstairs and collected the bound book early Monday morning." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "And this Mr. Burton, what became of him after Monday?" The assistant, Burton himself, shifted uneasily. He swallowed and removed his hands from his trouser pockets. I left on Tuesday, sir. Family emergency in Wiltshire. I asked Mr. Pearson to forward anything addressed to me to my London lodgings," I interjected gently. "Might we see the order slip, Mr. Pearson? The one authorizing special binding materials?" Reluctantly, he dug through a drawer and produced a slip bearing Burton's handwriting. "Order. Bind 16 pages of ledger with Ashbury Industries watermark in coir fibre binding. Priority delivery by Monday. Client name, Burton and Sons. Poirot accepted the slip, inspecting it with his loupe. "Note, Hastings, how the I dots are imperfectly spaced, and the ascenders of L are truncated. A clerk unfamiliar with the firm's usual style." He turned to Burton. "Mr. Burton and Sons is a real establishment?" Burton's face flushed. "No, monsieur. I use that name to conceal my involvement from prying eyes." His voice cracked. "I was paid handsomely by Mr. Faraday for secrecy." He looked to Pearson. I had no choice." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You were the forger's intermediary. delivering the inserted pages bearing false entries. Now, by what means did you obtain the Ashbury watermark? Burton swallowed, gaze flickering. I was supplied with blank pages torn from genuine Ashbury stationery, stolen from the Duke's own office. A courier delivered them to me. I glanced at Mr. Pearson, who paled. Pearson, I said, do you recall any deliveries of paper or blank stationery into this shop? Mr. Pearson shook his head. None official. Everything arrives via our usual paper supplier, Broad & Co., in neat reams. Poirot tapped his finger on the order slip. So, the courier who brought you those pages was neither your supplier nor any known acquaintance. He turned back to Burton. Name your courier. We may yet find him. Burton's face crumpled. It was a man, tall, with a grey moustache, wore a bowler hat and a dark overcoat. He identified himself as an agent of Grafton & Co., and he left in haste after delivering the bundle. Poirot's expression sharpened. Grafton & Co. again, the very firm whose managing partner is Mr. Faraday. Your description fits him or one of his lieutenants. He rose and stepped toward the door. Burton, remain here until Inspector Bannister arrives. Pearson, we shall require your ledger of arrivals and departures for Friday through Monday. Every delivery, every agent. The butler's clerk found himself momentarily caught between loyalty and legal obligation. He acquiesced, providing a logbook. Within minutes, we had extracted the detailed records. An unrecorded parcel delivered late Thursday by a carriage, with Grafton & Co. insignia. A note that it contained special paper. The page was simply annotated Confidential. Poirot tucked the logbook into his case. Hastings, I believe we have the evidence we require. He turned to Burton. Your confession and these records shall aid in securing a conviction. You will need to testify at the sessions. Burton bowed. Relief mingled with dread in his eyes. Yes, monsieur. We left the bindery with renewed purpose. The afternoon air, once thick with autumn chill, now felt invigorating. Another shadow-dispelled Hastings. Poirot observed as we climbed into our cab. We have traced the forged ledger from Ashbury Court, through Grafton & Co., to the bindery, and to the hapless clerk Burton. I nodded. And the duel has been prevented, the dukes reconciled, the public informed. Now only the courts remain between us and full justice. He tapped the side of the cab. Precisely. But let us not tarry. We must inform Inspector Bannister of our findings, that he may lay charges against Faraday and his accomplices. After that, we shall return to Ashbury Court to witness the final reconciliation ceremony. As our cab sped toward Scotland Yard, I reflected upon the dizzying path that had carried us from an anonymous warning note to the very heart of unlawful intrigue. Beneath the veneer of aristocratic honour had lurked the promise of shame and bloodshed, but through Poirot's meticulous logic the darkness had been banished, and still there remained one final flourish. The public judicial vindication of the Duke's honour, and the transformation of enmity into enduring friendship under the clear October sky. Chapter 4. The Courtroom Confrontation. The morning sun shone weakly through the fog as Hercule Poirot and I made our way to Scotland Yard. The heavy wooden doors swung open before us, admitting a gust of chilly air and the stern countenance of Inspector Bannister. We followed him down a corridor lined with commendations and wanted posters until he paused before a locked cell. Within stood Mr. Cornelius Faraday, the managing partner of Grafton & Co., his dark overcoat removed to reveal a cravat askew and a pallid face etched with apprehension. "Gentlemen," Bannister said, yielding space for Poirot to step forward, "we have secured a prima facie case of conspiracy to commit forgery, incitement to breach of the peace, and attempted homicide by duelling arms. The evidence submitted by Monsieur Poirot is overwhelming." He produced a thick file, Burton's confession, Pearson's delivery log, ink sample analysis, and the bound ledger. Faraday's gaze flicked from page to page, his composure faltering. As Bannister read the charges, I noted Poirot's serene poise, his little grey cells satisfied at last. Within the hour, Faraday was conveyed by constables through Whitehall to the Old Bailey. We followed in a hired cab, passing Westminster Abbey's towering spires and the chemist shops of Chancery Lane. The crowds outside the courtroom swelled with curiosity. Newspaper hawkers shouting headlines, "Duel destroyed!" "Grafton & Co. in disgrace!" At the carriage's arrival, Poirot removed his hat, exchanging nods with Bannister, who held the warrant. We ascended the steps into the marbled foyer, the echo of our boots swallowed by the vast dome overhead. Inside Court No. 3, the benches filled swiftly. Barristers in their black gowns arranged papers at the Crown table, while Faraday sat, shackled at the dock, flanked by 2 officers. Behind him stood his counsel, a lean advocate with sharp features and an air of practised detachment. The prosecutor, Mr. Fairchild, a formidable fellow with steely spectacles, rose to open the case. "May it please your honour," Fairchild began, voice resonant, "we stand here to denounce the abuse of trust and the perversion of honour. The defendant, Mr. Cornelius Faraday, and his accomplices conspired to forge documents so as to provoke a duel between 2 noble dukes, thereby profiting through the disgrace and downfall of Ashbury industries. Such conduct strikes at the very heart of public order." He gestured to the ledger. "Exhibit A, the spurious ledger, bound in modern thread, ink composed of recent aniline dyes, bearing a forged Ashbury watermark. Exhibit B, the log of Pearson & Co., confirming the illicit delivery of blank stationery. Exhibit C, the confession of Clerk Burton. And Exhibit D, the note inciting Monsieur Poirot to prevent bloodshed. Together, they prove concerted wrongdoing." Fairchild paused, scanning the courtroom. The duel was only averted by the astute intervention of Hercule Poirot. Yet without this miraculous revelation, 2 noble bloodlines might have been stained with mortal tragedy. I ask that this court uphold justice in the name of mercy, by delivering a sentence that deters such corporate treachery. He sat amid murmurs of assent. Poirot's calm eyes fixed upon Faraday, whose counsel now rose for the defence. "My lord," the advocate began, "Mr. Faraday stands accused of grave offences, yet we must consider the context. The ducal houses engaged in private arbitration and negotiated commercial terms repeatedly, only to be stonewalled by Ashbury Industries' monopolistic practices. My client sought only to compel fair play, to balance a playing field tilted by inherited privilege. He waved a gloved hand. No blood was shed, no life extinguished, My client operated within the law of commerce. The advocate paced before the bench. If any wrongdoing occurred, it was in the realm of business rivalry, not of criminal conspiracy. Mr. Faraday expresses sincere regret that his stratagem led to such dangerous consequences and stands prepared to make full restitution. He concluded with an appeal to compassion. Inspector Bannister then presented a concise summary of police findings, the delivery records, the identity of Burton & Sons as an alias, and the motive to profit from Ashbury's discredit. Bannister's voice was measured, his respect for Poirot's detective work clear. With this evidence, he closed, I commend the Crown to your Honour's discretion. At last Poirot rose, clearing his throat ever so slightly. The courtroom fell silent. Your Worship, he began, I do not rise to argue mercy or severity, but to speak for truth. The law exists to protect honour, property, and life. In this case, Mr. Faraday misused corporate means to engineer private violence, a perversion of both commerce and duelling ritual. Yet if we temper justice with mercy, we may salvage a man's capacity for good. He unfolded the anonymous note. This note, while apocryphal, guided me to uncover a peril. The ledger was no mere business document, but a weapon intended to wound reputations and flesh. I urge this court to recognize Mr. Faraday's contrition, but also to affirm that no exploitation is innocent. He sat. The magistrate, a stern lady in judicial robes, consulted her notes. After a brief recess, she returned, her expression grave. Mr. Faraday, she intoned, this court finds you guilty on counts of conspiracy to commit forgery, incitement to breach of the peace, and conspiracy to provoke bodily harm. However, in recognition of your cooperation, your prior good character, and the absence of any actual violence, I hereby sentence you to 3 years penal servitude, suspended on the condition of your good conduct for 10 years. The payment of 2,000 zilns in restitution to Ashbury Industries, and the undertaking to fund a trust for duelling prevention and fair trade practices. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Faraday bowed his head, relief mingled with remorse evident in his posture. The magistrate continued. Furthermore, you are to issue a public apology in the Times, co-signed by Lord Ashbury and Lord Beaumont, retracting your libellous claims. As the gavel fell, Beaumont and Ashbury, present in the gallery, rose and exchanged a respectful bow. A clerk handed them the prepared apology, and they affixed their signatures beneath Faraday's contrite declaration. The 3 men then emerged from the courtroom together, an emblem of reconciliation. Outside, reporters clustered, cameras flashing. Poirot, Hastings, Bannister, and the Dukes stepped onto the courthouse steps beneath a banner of autumn sunshine. A scribe approached Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, your comments? Poirot offered a small bow. Justice has been served, madam. May it deter those who confuse commerce with combat. The reporters scribbled furiously as the procession dispersed. In the carriage ride home, Poirot leaned back and smiled. Hastings, observe how the scales of justice, when balanced with wisdom, tip not toward vengeance, but restoration. I nodded, warmed by the clarity of law and the power of evidence. That evening, back at Baker Street, Poirot retrieved the letter opener's sketch from his desk. He placed it in a mahogany box alongside his case notes. Another threat extinguished, Another secret revealed, he murmured, and 2 dukes preserved in honour. He turned to me, moustaches quivering with satisfaction. Mon ami Hastings, our work here is done. Tomorrow, I trust, may bring new mysteries, and with them new opportunities for truth. I raised my teacup in salute. To Justice Hercule, and to the little grey cells that illuminate it, and so ended the courtroom confrontation, in which the duplicitous machinations of commerce were unmasked. A threat to human life was dispelled, and honour, though tested, was restored under the guiding hand of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 5. A Night of Triumph and Reflection. The amber glow of lanterns lined the broad steps of Ashbury Court, as guests in evening dress ascended for the celebratory dinner held in honour of the Duke's reconciliation. Autumn's chill had deepened to a frosty bite, but within the great hall a blaze roared in the hearth, its light dancing upon the high stucco ceiling and reflecting from crystal chandeliers. Guards stood at attention beside the carved oak doors, their polished cuirasses gleaming, while footmen whispered in the wings, ready to announce each party as they entered the long gallery. I arrived first, accompanied by Monsieur Poirot, who wore his finest evening coat, midnight blue with jet, buttons, and a white silk carnation in his lapel. I noted the carriage of both dukes. Sebastian, Duke of Ashbury, dressed in his autumnal-hued brocade waistcoat, greeted each newcomer with solemn courtesy. Alistair, Duke of Beaumont, offered hearty toasts and a quick, bright smile to ladies, in pearls. The air was rife with subdued excitement, clinking glasses, muffled laughter, the soft rustle of silk. At the head table, Mrs. Whitbourne, the Duchess's cousin and hostess for the evening, presided with elegant dignity. On her left sat Ashbury, on her right Beaumont. Poirot and I occupied honoured places beside them. Silver trumpets sounded, and the assembled company rose to drink a toast to peace, honour, and renewal. Crystal goblets raised, the hall erupted in hearty applause. I felt Poirot's finger brush mine in satisfaction, an unspoken tribute to justice served. After the toast, the first course was served, consommé clear as morning frost, garnished with chervil and tiny quenelles. While plates were cleared, Lord Spencer opened the conversation. "I confess," he said, addressing both dukes, "I feared for your lives these past weeks. To see you seated together again warms the heart." Beaumont inclined his head. "I owe sincere thanks to Monsieur Poirot," he replied. "His intervention spared me and my cousin from the folly of violence." Ashbury offered a wry smile. "And spared the realm from scandal." Poirot inclined his head, moustaches quivering with modest pride. "I am but the instrument of truth, monsieur. It is your willingness to seek evidence that saved you both." I noted how each word soothed the tension that had once loomed between the two noble houses. Even the titled peers at the table leaned forward, appreciating the delicate balance of acknowledgment and humility. The second course arrived: roast, pheasant with chestnut shallot stuffing, accompanied by buttery turnips and crisp bacon lardons. Between mouthfuls, conversation turned to the future of the Anti-Duelling Trust, the philanthropic venture established by the Dukes to sponsor peaceful arbitration in disputes of honour. Lady Marguerite Beckingham, chair of the Trust's inaugural committee, rose to summarise plans. "We shall establish a London office, travel to Oxford and Cambridge to lecture on honour's true meaning, and provide mediators for gentlemen and gentlewomen inclined to quarrel. Beaumont smiled at Adelaide, his long-time friend and confidant, seated nearby. "I volunteer to fund the arbitration travels," he said, "and will host the first retreat at Beaumont Hall." Adelaide curtsied. "And I shall assist with the educational materials," she declared. Ashbury tapped his glass. "Then we are agreed. Let the trust stand as monument to our folly's reversal." The table erupted in approval once more. Meanwhile, behind the pillars, I spotted Burton, the remorseful clerk whose confession had unlocked the ledger's secret. Ashbury caught my eye and beckoned him forward. "Young man," he said, "your honesty has spared 2 lives. I invite you to join my household as assistant archivist." Burton bowed, tears shining. "I shall serve faithfully, your grace." The hall fell silent in homage to mercy, and Poirot tapped his glass to encourage applause. Dessert followed, poached pears in red wine, cinnamon, and star anise. As the last tender morsels were savoured, a hush settled. Poirot rose, glass in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have witnessed a transformation, of fear into hope, of anger into friendship. This evening we not only celebrate 2 dukes at peace, but the triumph of evidence over impulse." He gestured broadly. "May the little grey cells continue to guide us all, whether in matters of state or matters of heart." The hall filled with a standing ovation. After dinner, guests moved to the drawing-room for music and dancing. A small string quartet began, a lively waltz, and Beaumont led Adelaide onto the dance floor, their steps light and carefree. Ashbury, offering his arm, invited Mrs. Whitbourne to dance. She accepted with laughter, and the pair circled gracefully. Poirot caught my eye, his expression both amused and reflective. "Observe, Hastings," he whispered as we mingled near the sideboard, "how reconciliation fosters art and music, twin fruits of the human spirit's resilience." I sipped port and watched the swirling dancers. Near the fireplace, the ducal crest and the trust's emblem, intertwined swords sheathed before an olive branch, had been carved in ice. Warm light from sconces struck the sculpture, casting prismatic patterns on the walls. The symbolism was not lost on our guests. Swords laid down in service of peace, a testament to the lesson learned. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Ashbury and Beaumont strode onto the terrace for a final toast beneath the starry sky. Torches flared, casting long shadows across the gravel. Ashbury raised a flask of fine brandy. "To my cousin, whose courage in demanding truth has restored my honour." Beaumont saluted with his glass. "And to my cousin, whose willingness to accept evidence saved us both." They drank deeply, and the 2 men clasped forearms in fraternal solidarity. Poirot and I joined them, the cold air biting, but our spirits warmed by the bonds of fellowship. I placed a careful hand on each duke's shoulder. "May this night stand as proof that the bravest act is not a shot fired in anger, but the admission of error and the embrace of truth." The dukes nodded, emotion glistening in their eyes. Carriages awaited to bear us back to London. We lingered on the terrace. Ashbury turned to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot, I owe you a debt no words can express." Poirot bowed. "Your Grace's honour is sufficient reward." Beaumont clapped Poirot on the shoulder. "And my thanks, too. This courtship of reason over violence will echo through our lands." Back in the hansom, I settled beside Poirot as the lamps of Ashbury Court receded into the night. "Another crisis averted, another lesson in mercy," I said. Poirot exhaled in contentment. "And so we close this chapter, Hastings, not with bloodshed, but with laughter, music, and a pledge to do better. The little grey cells have 3 allies: truth, compassion, and courage." As we rattled toward Baker Street beneath a canopy of October stars, I felt the full measure of the evening's triumph. The duel of honour had become the dance of reconciliation. And in the wake of drama and danger, Ashbury's Grand Hall bore witness to the enduring power of justice guided by kindness. Chapter 6. Shadows over the Trust. The fortnight following the sumptuous banquet at Ashbury Court passed in a golden haze of confidence and purpose. By day, the Anti-Duelling Trust's London office at Burlington Gardens hummed with activity. Clerks filed membership applications from gentlemen and ladies alike. Secretaries drafted circulars for provincial branches, and an eloquent pamphlet on honour without bloodshed rolled fresh from the press. By night, the city's fog rolled in from the Thames, curling through gaslit streets and casting ghostly shadows upon the Trust's bronze-plated owl emblem above the doorway. It was in that shifting half-light that a new threat revealed itself. A grey Wednesday morning, I arrived at the office to find Monsieur Poirot already at his desk, poring over a sheaf of letters. His brows were drawn, moustaches quivering with concentration. He looked up as I entered. "Hastings, there is a matter that demands our little grey cells. An envelope delivered half an hour ago, bearing no postmark and inscribed in a trembling hand." He handed me the missive. Across the cover were scrawled the words, "Cease this folly," or "Feel the point of my blade where honour still dwells." No signature. Inside, a single sheet of vellum contained only the word "midnight," followed by a small blood-red dot. The note was stark, menacing, and intimately tied to the cause we had so recently championed. "Another duel threatened?" I whispered, scanning the paper. Poirot nodded gravely. "Indeed, but not between dukes this time. This missive is addressed to the Trust itself, a challenge to abandon our peaceful mission or face violent reprisal." He rose, straightening his waistcoat. "We must learn its origin and its author, Hastings. Before dawn beckons another confrontation." We summoned Mr. Bellamy, the Trust's clerk of protocols, to learn who last accessed the post-room. His tousled auburn hair and nervous carriage bespoke excitement more than fear. "Just before sunrise, sir, a tall man in riding habit arrived. No hat, muffled in a dark cloak. He slipped the envelope through the slot and vanished into the fog." Bellamy pressed his lips together. I did not see his face. Poirot pressed a small note into Bellamy's hand. "Better, Mr. Bellamy, if you kept vigil at the slot tonight. Should he return at midnight, we will apprehend him." The clerk bowed and hurried away. The day's meetings proceeded under an uneasy pall. Lord Beaumont chaired a committee on regional expansion, his enthusiastic tone undercut by glances toward the office door. Lord Ashbury, seated beside him, drummed his fingers on the polished table as though measuring each passing minute. During a tea break, I approached Ashbury privately. Your Grace, you seem burdened." He exhaled slowly. Ever since that note arrived, a chill has descended. Is our mission so contemptible that men resort to threats of violence? I laid a hand on his arm. "Reassure yourself, Your Grace. Every act of peace affronts those who profit from strife. We shall uncover the author and restore calm." He nodded, resolve rekindled. By late afternoon, Hastings and Combe, private inquiry agents retained by the Trust, delivered word of a suspicious figure seen loitering near Burlington Gardens. The description matched Bellamy's. Tall, riding habit, dark cloak. Poirot smiled thinly. A duellist out of season, or perhaps a hired ruffian. He bade me accompany him to the nearby tavern, where our man was said to have paused for a tankard of porter. The tavern's low beams and brackish air held the smell of spilled ale and stale tobacco. At a corner table, a man with bent shoulders drained his mug, the cloak's folds concealing his face. Poirot tapped my arm. "Observe, Hastings, the wax seal impression on his ring, an anchor motif." He slipped from my side, advancing with calm authority. "Good evening, sir," Poirot began, voice gentle yet inexorable. "Might I trouble you for your name and the reason for your interest in the Trust?" The man started, then rose with surprising agility. He spun, cloak swirling, revealing a jaundiced face and a hunting boot slashed by a spur. "None of your business, Frenchman," he spat. Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Ah, but it is my business, and that of the law. You delivered a threat to the Trust. Will you accompany us to Burlington Gardens?" The man's eyes glinted with cunning. "You cannot bribe me or frighten me." Poirot's moustaches twitched in amusement. "We shall rely on persuasion, monsieur." He reached out and deftly unhooked the cloak's brooch, a silver anchor, then produced a pair of handcuffs. The ruffian's face grew ashen as Bannister's constables arrived to take him into custody. Back at the Trust, we confronted the captive in a small interview room. He glared, arms bound. Poirot produced the brooch. "This emblem belongs to the Seaforth Yacht Club, also founded by Lord Beaumont. You are Mr. Nathaniel Drake, once a swordsman of some repute. You have lost your position there, have you not?" Drake's jaw clenched. "I sought the Trust's ruin because you have made duelling dishonourable. You disgrace the very art that gave me standing." Poirot tilted his head. "You confuse violence with honour. Your fellow yacht club members abandoned your cause when you began issuing challenges at midnight. You forged the letter to test your prowess, yet did not consider that duelling requires justice, not cruelty." Drake's shoulders sagged. "I wanted to prove the code still vital." Poirot's lips curved into a slight smile. "Your demonstration has indeed proven its obsolescence. The Trust will extend you aid to reclaim your good standing, on condition you cease these nocturnal provocations." Drake bowed his head. "I accept." With the ruffian's confession in hand, we dispatched a report to Inspector Bannister and informed the Seaforth Yacht Club's secretary. The threat of midnight had been one man's misguided protest, not a conspiracy to murder. That evening, Poirot and I returned to Ashbury Court for a private meeting with the Dukes and Lady Beckingham. The great library warmed by the hearths. Flames seemed a safe haven from the world's storms. Beaumont rose to greet us. Monsieur Poirot, Hastings, your swift resolution gladdens my heart." He clasped Poirot's hand. Ashbury pressed Drake's brooch into Poirot's palm. For the Trust's collection, a reminder that even old traditions can yield new wisdom. Lady Beckingham moved to light the candelabra. "Let us celebrate with a small repast," she suggested, producing a silver tray of sweets. As we ate, the dukes discussed the future. Lecture tours, gentle duelling exhibitions illustrating safe practice, and scholarships for fencing à la honourable sport. The spectre of violence receded into memory. Before departing, Poirot stood and addressed the assemblage. "Gentle friends, we have seen how the duel's blade, once aimed in anger, may be repurposed in service of peace. The little grey cells have once more illuminated darkness." He raised his glass. "To the Trust, and to the triumph of reason over impulse." Glasses clinked. Warm laughter filled the hall. That night, back in our lodgings at Baker Street, I extinguished the candles while Poirot reviewed the day's events. "Hastings," he said softly, "the shadows of old codes still linger. Yet when guided by logic and compassion, we may turn fear into fellowship." He placed the silver anchor brooch on his mantle, a token both of challenge and of resolution. "Now, mon ami, we rest. Tomorrow the Trust's work continues, unburdened by threats, propelled by hope." I extinguished the final wick and wished him bonne nuit. In the hush of the study, I reflected on the journey from a threatened duel to a gathering of unity. The affair of the duelling dukes had reached its penultimate turn. From powder and pettiness to pamphlets and purpose. And in that transition lay the true victory of a detective's art, and of honour redeemed. Chapter 7. The Blade in the Pavilion Autumns. Breath had turned crisp when the Anti-Duelling Trust mounted its first public demonstration at Beaumont Hall. A crowd of dignitaries, journalists and invited guests assembled upon the gravel forecourt beneath tents bearing the Trust's emblem, nay, pair of sheathed swords crossed before an olive branch. Beneath a swiftly brightening sky, Lord Beaumont and Lord Ashbury greeted the onlookers with solemn speeches, extolling the virtues of honour without bloodshed. Then, at precisely 11 o'clock, the pavilion doors swung open to reveal a raised platform upon which the fencing demonstration would take place. I stood in the front row alongside Monsieur Poirot, Lady Beckingham, and Colonel Callum Ramsay, whose years of service as Grand Master of the London Fencing Club lent the event a formal air. In the centre of the platform, two elaborately carved pedestals supported blunt-tipped rapiers. The first, ancient steel once used in regulated duels. The second, a state-of-the-art safety blade crafted by Beaumont Hall's armourers. A hush fell as Signor Vittorio Vivaldi, the celebrated Italian fencing master, stepped forward. His black hair was slicked back, and his dark eyes glinted beneath his hawk-like brow. He bowed low, "Mesdames et messieurs," he intoned with an accent as sharp as his blade. "I shall demonstrate the art of engagement, first as it was, then as it may be, without harm." He lifted the ancient rapier and tapped it on the pedestals, the crowd leaning forward to catch each metallic ring. "Observe the tradition." Then, slipping the antique back, he raised the modern safety blade. "And now, compassion." The audience applauded politely. Vivaldi beckoned Colonel Ramsay to the platform. "Colonel, will you serve as my partner?" Ramsay, regally uniformed, placed his hand upon the hilt of the steel safety weapon. The pair adopted classic en garde positions. Poirot and I exchanged pleased glances, the Trust's mission unfolding as intended. They advanced in measured steps, points lowered. A series of slow lunges, parries, and ripostes followed, each motion choreographed with precision. The crowd murmured admiration at Ramsay's elegance and Vivaldi's fluid footwork. Within minutes, the demonstration reached its finale. Both swords were sheathed in their blunt tips, and Vivaldi offered Ramsay a courteous salute. The audience erupted in cheers, but as the applause swelled, a sudden sharp gasp cut through the clamour. Vivaldi, his salute frozen, staggered backward, and Ramsay, grasping his left side, reeled as though struck. I leapt forward, but Poirot was already at the platform's edge. Vivaldi's face drained of colour. "Monsieur, mon Dieu!" he cried, reaching toward Ramsay, who sank to one knee, crimson blooming across his uniform. A dark stain spread over his tunic where no blunt tip should have drawn blood. The pavilion, once filled with celebration, dissolved into pandemonium. Guests scrambled back as Ramsay collapsed fully, moaning with pain. Poirot vaulted onto the platform, his voice clear. "Remove the blade, gently!" A footman seized the weapon. To our horror, the safety blade's tip was revealed to be razor-sharp, its polished steel gleaming wickedly. Poirot caught the blade and held it aloft, examining its slender point. "This is no safety weapon. It is a duellist's steel," he announced, voice resonant. A hush fell. Lady Beckingham reached my arm. "Good heavens, who would tamper?" she whispered. Poirot secured the blade by the hilt and turned to Beaumont and Ashbury, who had descended to Ramsay's side. "Your Graces," he said, "the demonstration was sabotaged. Ramsay's uniform has been pierced by this single thrust. We must assume intent to kill." He knelt beside Ramsay, applying firm pressure to the wound. "Madam," he cried to the Duchess of Ashbury, who had joined us, "fetch lint and bandages, if you please." Amid the chaos, dust motes danced in the morning sunlight. Guests scattered as servants rushed in with first-aid supplies. Beaumont knelt too, voice taut. "Ramsay, hold on!" He pressed a handkerchief to the wound. I caught Poirot's eye. His moustaches quivered with determination. "Hastings, note how the platform's edge bears a single scuff mark, ritual of a practised lunge." He pointed to a faint abrasion on the wooden floor, a sliver of displaced varnish. "And that, mon ami, signals the angle of attack, left flank, exactly where Ramsay stood." With Ramsay stabilized by caring hands, Poirot rose. "Remain here, Hastings. I must examine the pavilion." He beckoned me to follow him into the rear of the tent, where the racks of demonstration swords were stored. The air was thick with the odour of damp grass and spilled brandy from a toppled flask. Several weapons lay haphazardly across a table, some blunt-tipped, some sharpened for display, but none with truly lethal points, save one. Poirot's slender finger hovered above a safety blade identical to the one used in the demonstration, yet this blade too bore a sharpened tip. "Two have been altered," he murmured, "one deployed in the assault, the other left at the rear, perhaps a decoy." He lifted the second rapier and turned it in the dim backlight. "These are not the armourer's work. They bear the maker's mark of Beaumont Hall, but the edges are too keen." He tapped the ricasso. "This forging was done elsewhere, then stamped with the hall's crest. A modern craft, not our master blacksmith's." I examined the mark through his loupe, a stylized BH beneath a ducal coronet. Yet the metal's grain was too fine, its temper too brittle for the established workshop. Pre-forged blanks, Poirot concluded. The saboteur required authentic-looking blades, but would not risk discovery in the hall's smithy. He packaged both rapiers carefully and exited the tent, leaving me to follow him toward the crowd. In the forecourt, press photographers jostled as the Duchess of Ashbury held Ramsay aloft on a sedan chair. Poirot cleared a path, raising his voice. "May I have your attention?" The crowd stilled. "Friends of the Trust, this act of violence shall not deter our mission, but we must unmask its author. I ask any present who noticed suspicious movements around the pavilion before 11 o'clock to come forward." A murmur, then a timid hand. Bellamy, the protocol clerk, emerged from the periphery, face pale. "Monsieur Poirot, I saw Mr. Merryweather, the fencing master from Cambridge, slipping behind the platform just before the demonstration began." Colour drained from the crowd at his name. Professor Alistair Merryweather, once celebrated in academic circles for his treatise on combat ethics, now retired from public life. His reputation had been impeccable. Until now. Poirot beckoned Merryweather forth, his cold grey eyes fixed. The professor, tall and thin, his spectacles perched precariously, obeyed with a quivering gait. Poirot seized his arm. "Professor Merryweather, why did you carry a sharpened blade into the pavilion?" Merryweather's lips trembled. I did not intend harm, only to demonstrate the truth of my argument. Violence is ever a temptation. I wish to show that even a well-meaning trust can fall prey to bloodshed." His voice cracked. I sought to provoke a crisis that would force debate, so that the Academy would explore the moral limits of duelling. By attempting murder, Poirot's voice was ice. You claimed to champion discourse, yet placed Colonel Ramsay's life at risk. Merryweather bowed his head. Yes, I was wrong. Beaumont approached, face ashen with sorrow. You have endangered my friend, he said quietly. You will answer for this folly. Poirot stepped between them. Let justice take its course. Tonight the police will escort Professor Merryweather. Yet let us remember the Trust's purpose, to exchange violence for dialogue. Even now, the Academy of Combat is preparing a symposium on duelling ethics. He turned to the assembled. Let this event prove that we need not draw steel to spark debate. The crowd, stirred by the professor's confession and the prospect of rational discussion, broke into cautious applause. Merryweather was led away, head bowed. Poirot and I lingered as Beaumont embraced Ramsay once more. The colonel's uniform stained, but his spirit unbroken. Later, in the drawing-room of Beaumont Hall, Poirot mused by the fire with Lady Beckenham and the dukes. Gentle friends, he began, today we have confronted the darkest impulse of man, to seek bloodshed in the name of principle. Yet by exposing the assassin and sparing his victim, We reaffirmed our faith in reason. He sipped his port. May the Trust's next lecture be attended by all who believed that only a blade could prove honour, so that they witnessed truth's sharper edge. All around, the warmth of fellowship had banished the chill of fear. As autumn's dusk settled, beyond mullioned windows, I reflected on the courage it takes to replace steel with speech, an even subtler art than any performed with a duellist's blade, and in that moment I understood more deeply than ever the power of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells to illuminate both the darkness of human folly and the brilliance of human compassion. Chapter 8. The Phantom Artisan. The sun was barely risen when Hercule Poirot and I reassembled at the offices of the Anti-Duelling Trust on Burlington Gardens. The night's autumn mist still clung to the gas lamps, lending an eerie chill to the otherwise triumphant atmosphere. We had barely set foot in the lobby when Poirot lifted a slender index card from his coat pocket. "Hastings," he murmured, moustaches quivering with purpose. "There remains one unsatisfied question. Who forged the 2 rapiers used in the pavilion fiasco? Professor Merriweather confessed to wielding the blade, but he did not temper the steel or stamp the ducal crest. We must pursue the phantom artisan." I nodded. "Do you suspect another hand, mon ami?" "Precisely," Poirot replied. "Observe how the blade's ricasso bears a faint mark, barely perceptible without magnification. We shall examine that first." He led me into his study, where under a bright lamp he inspected the safety sword, confiscated from the pavilion. With a jeweller's loupe, he traced a tiny engraving upon the ricasso, the letters IG entwined beneath a slender star. "A signature," Poirot observed. "IG, the work of an individual who wishes to remain concealed beneath initials. Let us consult Colonel Ramsay's fencing circle for any known bladesmiths or instructors bearing these initials." By mid-morning, we sat in the elegant rooms of the London Fencing Club, graciously granted by Colonel Ramsay. There, under racks of gleaming foils and épées, we questioned old Master Coda, a retired Italian maestro whose eyes shone with the memory of countless duels. "Is there an Igor among the fencing masters you have known?" Poirot inquired, his French accent precise. Coda's fingers, stained faintly with oil, paused over a pair of ceremonial rapiers. "Ah, yes," he said at last, voice laced with nostalgia. "Count Igor Geiger, Russian émigré, once champion of St. Petersburg's Salle d'Armes. He taught here for 1 season, then vanished, citing health and family obligations. Yet his pupils say his blades were beyond compare, deadly in both form and finish." "Geiger," Poirot repeated, steepling his fingers. "The initials match, and a Russian count might well possess the means to forge weapons of renown. Hastings, we shall find his haunt." That afternoon we traced refugee directories to locate Count Geiger's last known address, 27 Leal Street in Soho. When our taxi drew up beside a narrow brick facade bearing a faded sign, Geiger's Salle d'Armes, Poirot alighted with an air of satisfaction. "He could not have chosen a more discreet quarter," he remarked, scanning the dim interior through the glass door. Half swords and jackets hung on hooks. The scent of oiled wood and metal drifted to the street. A single oil lamp glowed by the counter. We entered, Poirot's gaze absorbing every detail. A lean man in a scarlet waistcoat stood behind the counter, dark hair streaked with grey, moustache waxed to fine points. Count Geiger? Poirot inquired, bowing slightly. The Count's eyes narrowed. I am he, Geiger replied in accented English. May I help you? Poirot stepped forward, offering his card. Monsieur le Comte, I am Hercule Poirot, invited by Colonel Ramsay to inspect the safety blades he commissioned. We have reason to believe that you may have forged 2 such weapons, stamping them with the Beaumont Hall crest. Geiger's expression flickered. I forge nothing for dueling clubs, he said coldly. My art is teaching the science of movement, not the commerce of blades. I watched Poirot's eyes soften as he removed the pavilion's weapon from his coat. Then how do you explain the resemblance between this blade and your celebrated pieces? He asked. He placed the sword on the counter. Geiger inhaled sharply at sight of the weapon's tip, his face paling. That blade, he whispered, was crafted from a blank I supplied years ago, but I never tempered it, never sharpened it to dueling edge. Tears glistened in his eyes. Someone stole my template and completed the work elsewhere. Poirot's moustaches quivered with empathy. You mean to say that a second artisan used your pattern and crest to ill purpose? Geiger bowed his head. Yes, I recall a visitor who sought my counsel late last autumn. A well-dressed Englishman who admired my work. I demonstrated the forging process. Then he departed with a sketch of the crest. I assumed it was a collector's request. I do not know who he was. The Count's distress was genuine. Poirot laid a hand upon his sleeve. Monsieur le Comte, you will assist us in identifying this visitor. Did he leave his name? Geiger hesitated. He called himself Mr. Brandon. No other details. Brandon, Poirot repeated, frowning. Hastings, we must learn whether any branded inquiries came to your bindery, to Beaumont Hall, or to Grafton & Co. Perhaps this mysterious Mr. Brandon orchestrated the duplicity. We secured Geiger's cooperation and left the salle d'armes with new leads. Poirot strode into the street, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. We have narrowed our quarry to one who traffics in secrets and steel. Brandon, an English name, but common enough. He gazed up at the darkening sky. Tonight, Hastings, we shall search those inspired by this blade's theft. Grafton & Co., Beaumont Hall's archives, and the offices of Armitage & Sons, fencing equipment suppliers. The puzzle nears its final configuration. I marshalled our resources. Bannister dispatched officers to Grafton & Co. to return our earlier inquiry. I undertook to search Beaumont Hall's delivery records, and we arranged to visit Armitage & Sons at first light. That evening at Baker Street, Poirot laid out all known evidence upon his desk. The 2 altered blades, the Ricasso Mark YG, Merryweather's confession, and now Geiger's revelation of the phantom Mr. Brandon. Observe, Hastings, said, pointing to the tableau, how each thread converges upon this elusive Mr. Brandon. Who among our suspects could have assumed such a name and manipulated both Professor and Count? He circled the display. A fencing master, perhaps, or a dealer in rare blades. Someone with root in every corner of London's martial community. He tapped the name Brandon, written in his notebook. We must find the man who hides behind a borrowed name like a duelist beneath a mask. I poured 2 glasses of sherry as he mused. Our labours narrow toward a final revelation, Hastings, said Poirot. The mask will fall, and the phantom artisan will stand exposed. He raised his glass to the next dawn, and to truth's blade, which cuts sharper than any steel. I clinked my glass in reply, watching the amber light flicker upon his moustached smile. Thus closed the chapter on the phantom artisan's unmasking, and the stage was set for the probing of a deeper conspiracy, one that threatened not only the Trust's mission, but the very fabric of London's honourable society. Tomorrow we would meet the final adversary, and at last sheathe the sword of suspicion once and for all. Chapter 9. The Unmasking of Mr. Brandon. The dawn mist had barely lifted when Hercule Poirot and I stepped from the hansom before the modest storefront of Armitage & Sons, fencing equipment suppliers of some repute. The sign above the door proclaimed in peeling gilt letters, Armitage & Sons, Master Cutlers and Fencing Accoutrements. A thin curl of smoke drifted from the chimney, betraying the early presence of a pot of tea and a stove fired up against the morning chill. Poirot adjusted his cravat, moustaches quivering with anticipation. "Hastings," he said softly, "we have identified the forger's supplier of steel, Count Geiger's stolen blanks, and the man who commissioned the 2 lethal rapiers, Mr. Brandon alias. Now we must discover whether Brandon has also supplied these blades through Armitage's outlets." He produced a slip of paper bearing the initials IG and the small star motif. "We seek any record of purchases bearing that mark, or of inquiries from one Mr. Brandon." We entered the front room, where racks of fine uniforms and foils lined the walls. A shopman with a thick moustache and bow tie looked up from a ledger at a long mahogany counter. His expression brightened briefly before stiffening into professional reserve. Poirot stepped forward, greeting him with a genial bow. "Good morning," Poirot began, voice as smooth as oiled leather. "I am Monsieur Hercule Poirot, and this is Mr. Hastings. We are investigating the recent sabotage of a public demonstration of non-lethal fencing at Beaumont Hall. 2 safety blades were maliciously altered to lethal edges. We understand that these blades may have been ordered, or at least inquired after, by a gentleman calling himself Mr. Brandon. Might I ask whether your firm retains any records of a purchase or request by such a name?" The shopman glanced toward a side door. "Mr. Armitage is in the storeroom, monsieur. I can—" "But first," Poirot interrupted gently, "might I inspect your ledger?" He indicated the bound book before the shopman. The clerk swallowed and handed it over, bending as if in deference to an ecclesiastical text. Poirot turned the pages methodically, eyes scanning columns of dates and names. Bainbridge, Collins, Davenport, and, at last, Brandon. See, 3 blades, custom fitting, deferred billing. He tapped the entry with a gloved finger. "Here, Hastings, November the 2nd. And note, he deferred billing, an odd request for untested blades." He glanced at the shopman. "Monsieur, to whom was this extension of credit originally agreed?" The clerk scratched his ear. "I recall, the account was opened by Mr. Charles Ingram, sir of that name, not Brandon. But he mentioned handling matters on behalf of a friend, one Mr. Brandon." His voice dropped to a whisper. "He paid a deposit and promised to settle the balance on delivery." Poirot's moustaches quivered with satisfaction. He replaced the ledger. "Mr. Hastings, inquiry number 1, Charles Ingram," We shall find him and question him as to the identity of his friend Mr. Brandon." He handed the ledger back, and the shopman hurriedly retreated through the storeroom door. Poirot and I lingered a moment to note the display of fencing jackets, their padded sleeves still unblooded, a silent testament to the Trust's cause. "Shall we pursue Mr. Ingram's address, mon ami?" I asked as we stepped back into the street, the London sky brightening to a pale blue. Poirot nodded, consulting a note scribbled on his visiting card holder. "Ingram & Co., solicitors in Holborn. We shall call upon them forthwith." Nicourt, hansom, drove us swiftly eastward across the city, past the Temple's red brick, until we climbed the steps to discreet door bearing the nameplate, Ingram & Co., solicitors. A balding clerk ushered us into Mr. Ingram's inner office, where the solicitor himself presided. A neatly groomed gentleman in a three-piece suit, spectacles perched at the end of his nose. He rose with a professional smile. "Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings, what gracious surprise! How may I assist you?" Poirot laid out the matter with artful brevity. A gentleman named Ingram had opened an account to purchase 3 custom safety blades, deferring payment on behalf of a Mr. Brandon. We wished to know why and for whom. Ingram's expression turned guarded. He replaced the papers on his desk and leaned back, fingers steepled. Mr. Ingram merely acted as attorney for Mr. Buckingham Brandon. He is a client of discreet standing. He requested safety blades, payment deferred to preserve discretion. Mr. Brandon entrusted me with no further identification. He paused. "If you can secure Mr. Brandon's consent to release full particulars, I might provide them." He sat back, awaiting our response. Poirot inclined his head. "Of course, Mr. Ingram, but I am sure you understand that matters of life and death require the utmost candour. Your client's identity must now be revealed to prevent further injury." He spoke with so much calm authority that Ingram's shoulders sagged slightly. "In that case," Ingram said, uncrossing his arms, "Mr. Buckingham Brandon is not a gentleman, but the alias of Mr. Benjamin Cromwell, a journalist by trade who sought to test the Trust's resilience by staging a mock assassination to illustrate duelling's dangers." He cleared his throat. Cromwell believed that by orchestrating a near-fatal incident, he could provoke a public outcry so vehement that the Trust's mission would be questioned. Poirot's moustaches twitched in interest. A sensationalist, then, tempting violence to manufacture debate. Did he admit as much to you? Ingram nodded. He confessed that he intended no real harm. The second blade was to be a prop, not truly razor-sharp. He commissioned Count Geiger to supply the forged but supposedly dulled rapiers. Yet he grossly underestimated the risk when pledging to have them sharpened, somewhere outside legitimate channels. I believe he recanted at the last moment, but in the confusion someone used the blade from his plot against Colonel Ramsay. Ingram paused, voice grave. "He awaits arrest, I presume?" "Indeed," Poirot replied. "We shall obtain a warrant." He turned to me. "Hastings, we have uncovered Benjamin Cromwell, alias Mr. Brandon. He is the phantom artisan's patron, the mastermind behind the pavilion's sabotage demonstration." He bowed to Ingram. "Thank you, sir, for your candour. Your testimony shall prove most useful in court." Back once more in the hansom, I asked Poirot, "Do you think Cromwell's scheme was wholly journalistic, or was there a darker motive? Poirot tapped his temple. Journalists seek headlines, but some covet sensation above all. Cromwell's plan combined fear and spectacle. Had the blade struck true, he would have captured world-shaking copy, so the motive was equal parts vanity and ambition, no more, no less. He paused, gaze drifting to the city's rooftops. Yet the damage wrought will last far beyond a single news cycle. We must ensure that the Trust's reputation remains unblemished by this tawdry affair. That afternoon, with a warrant in hand, we met Inspector Bannister at Cromwell's lodgings on Stratton Street. Cromwell, pale, rumpled about the collar, opened the door with feigned surprise. Bannister read the warrant and escorted him to Scotland Yard. Poirot watched the process with detached intensity, then turned to me. "Hastings," he said quietly, "with Cromwell's confession and the evidence we have amassed, Ingram's records, the IG engraving, Geiger's templates, we possess a complete chain of custody linking the blade from Armitage and Sons to Cromwell himself." He nodded. "Justice will be served." In the evening, at Baker Street, Poirot settled into his favourite armchair, pipe in hand. He produced from his pocket the original safety blade, now sheathed and stamped with the Trust's emblem. He held it thoughtfully in his gloved palm. "This blade," he mused, "has seen more intrigue than the sharpest sword. It bridged the course from noble demonstration to black market weapon, and now returns to rest under the aegis of truth." Schuy replaced the sword upon a velvet cushion. I poured a final glass of claret as he studied the blade's contours. "And the Trust?" I asked. "Will this incident mar its achievements?" Poirot smiled gently. "On the contrary, Hastings. By uncovering the plot, by confronting the journalist's hubris, the Trust proves its resilience. It shows that honour need not yield to spectacle, and that truth, like a razor's edge, reveals more than mere illusion." He tapped the blade's hilt. "May this instrument of peace stand as a reminder that every challenge can be answered without drawing blood." As the lamplight danced upon the polished wood of his desk, I marvelled at Poirot's gift for transmuting danger into lesson and sensation into substance. Tomorrow, Cromwell would face the courts. The fencing symposium would proceed under full security, and the Anti-Duelling Trust would publish an official account of the phantom artisan, its patron unmasked, its mission vindicated. And as sleep claimed us both that night, I reflected upon the curious truth that, in the hands of a detective's little grey cells, even the sharpest blade becomes a tool of revelation rather than destruction. For in the affair of the duelling dukes and of the blade in the pavilion, honour had prevailed over violence, and the promise of reason had bested the lure of spectacle. Chapter 10. The Trial of Sensation. Autumn's chill had deepened into a sharp November frost by the time the Old Bailey assembled its benches for the trial of Benjamin Cromwell, the journalist whose reckless scheme had nearly cost Colonel Ramsay his life. The grandeur of the court's panelled walls and stained-glass dome belied the gravity of the proceedings, for no mere slander or forgery stood before the bench, but an intentional endangerment of human life in the pursuit of sensational copy. Monsieur, Poirot and I arrived just as the great clock in the entrance hall struck 10. Inspector Bannister took our names in the witness gallery and nodded in acknowledgment, his faith in our testimony unwavering. Alongside us sat Colonel Ramsay, still convalescent though resolute, and Lady Beckingham, who had insisted on witnessing the condemnation of a man who would trade blood for headlines. We exchanged solemn greetings as the ushers called the court to order. At the centre of the dock stood Benjamin Cromwell, his once trimmed suit now threadbare, his hair dishevelled, and his posture stooped by remorse. His counsel, a thin man of pasty complexion, whispered last-minute instructions before surrendering the floor to the Crown Prosecutor, Mr. Fairchild. The prosecutor rose with measured dignity. "May it please your honour," Fairchild began, voice carrying through the hushed chamber. "The defendant stands charged on 3 counts: conspiracy to commit forgery, conspiracy to endanger life, and incitement to breach the peace. The evidence to be adduced is incontrovertible. First, the ordering of lethal blades under false pretences. Second, the falsification of Count Geiger's templates. And third, the substitution of a deadly edge in the pavilion demonstration that nearly extinguished the life of Colonel Callum Ramsay." He gestured toward Colonel Ramsay, seated just behind us, who inclined his head in acknowledgment. Fairchild continued, "We shall show in turn the testimony of Mr. Ingram, who bound Cromwell to the purchase of 3 safety blades, the account of Count Geiger, who recognises his designs misappropriated, the records of Armitage and Sons confirming the alias Mr. Brandon, and finally the confession of Professor Merriweather, whose blade was altered from the Count's original order." He paused, allowing the weight of these facts to register. "This court must determine whether the defendant's actions were mere folly or a deliberate enterprise to provoke violence in the guise of public enlightenment." With a nod from the presiding magistrate, Fairchild called his first witness, Charles Ingram, the solicitor. Ingram described how he had opened the account on Cromwell's behalf, producing the ledger entries and the handwritten order for 3 safety blades. When pressed by Cromwell's counsel, who argued that Cromwell had believed the blades would remain dull, Ingram admitted that Cromwell's assurances had been demonstrably optimistic. Next came Count Igor Geiger, summoned from his lodgings in Soho. Clad in an immaculate morning coat, the Count recounted the evening at his salle d'armes, when a Mr. Brandon had studied his forging process. Under cross-examination, he conceded that he had provided only the raw blanks, never the final edge. He held up one of his original blades for comparison, the grain of his temper and the artist's mark starkly contrasting with the altered weapon recovered from the pavilion. Then Mr. Arthur Pearson, the senior partner of Armitage and Sons, was called. His voice trembled slightly as he testified to the deferred billing arrangement and his concern when discovering the alias and the forged crest on the safety blades. He produced the shop's ledger with the entry for Brandon C. and explained how inspection of the blade's ricasso through a jeweller's loop had revealed the phantom artisan's mark, IG, beneath a slender star. The very engraving matched to Geiger's signature. Finally, Inspector Bannister provided the crucial link, the warrant executed at Cromwell's lodgings, where officers had discovered a stack of newspaper proofs bearing unmailed headlines about the would-be assassination of Colonel Ramsay. The proofs depicted staged scenes of violence and detailed instructions for the blade's concealment, all in Cromwell's handwriting. The inspector's evidence was bolstered by Burton's confession of having been paid by Mr. Brandon to deliver the blade, and by Professor Merriweather's prompt testimony regarding the sabotaged safety weapon. With the prosecution's case concluded, Cromwell's counsel rose to plead for leniency. He portrayed his client as a misguided thinker, an ambitious writer who had overstepped the bounds of ethical journalism but never intended actual bloodshed. The counsel described Cromwell's previous philanthropic endeavours, essays on social reform, and letters calling for greater compassion in public life. "He is a man of letters, Your Honour, who lost his sense of proportion when driven by the thirst for the next great revelation." Cromwell himself was then called to testify. He shuffled forward, eyes hollow, and raised a trembling hand in oath. His voice, when he spoke, was thin and haunted. I believed in the power of the spectacle to shock complacent minds," he began, "to illustrate that violence bore no more price than a blade's dull edge. But I never foresaw that the blade would be altered to kill. When I learned of Colonel Ramsay's injury, I was undone." Tears glistened in his eyes. He pleaded for mercy, acknowledging that his hubris had overshadowed both principle and humanity. "I was wrong," he repeated, voice breaking. "I accept whatever punishment this court deems just." As Cromwell resumed his seat, his counsel returned to ask for the court's indulgence. But the magistrate's gaze remained steely. After a brief private consultation with Mr. Fairchild, she addressed the court. "Mr. Cromwell," she said, voice resonant, "you stand convicted on all counts. The act of forging documents to incite violence, coupled with the foreseeable risk to human life, cannot be excused by intellectual curiosity or journalistic zeal. Yet this court recognizes your previous contributions to society and your genuine remorse." She paused, allowing her words to settle like snowfall. "Accordingly, I sentence you to 2 years' hard labour, suspended for 5 years on condition of your good behaviour, and to pay a fine of $500 in restitution to Colonel Ramsay. Moreover," she added, "you shall issue a public apology in the Times, acknowledging the harm your actions have caused to individuals and to the cause of honour without violence." A frenzy of scribbling erupted in the press gallery, while Cromwell lowered his head in acceptance. Colonel Ramsay, seated behind us, bowed his thanks to the court. Even Professor Merriweather and the clutch of diplomats from the Anti-Dueling Trust nodded in solemn satisfaction. The magistrate's gavel fell, and the room exhaled in collective relief. As we departed the dock, Inspector Bannister clasped Poirot's shoulder. "Mon ami, your evidence was decisive. Without it, this man might have escaped accountability." Poirot inclined his head. "Justice, detective, and judicial must be tempered by mercy when the contrition is genuine. The Chez, little grey cells have guided us well." Outside, the Thames glimmered in pale afternoon light. Colonel Ramsay offered to escort us to Beaumont Hall for a private dinner in honour of the Trust's vindication. We accepted, and soon the 3 of us boarded Bannister's motor car, its engine echoing on Whitehall's stones. At Beaumont Hall, that evening, the drawing-room was warmed by glowing logs and by the presence of Lord and Lady Beaumont, Lord and Lady Ashbury, Lady Beckenham, and a handful of the Trust's governors. A modest supper awaited, with poached trout, winter greens, and a light Madeira sauce, dishes chosen to reflect the new season. over toast and wine, Colonel Ramsay raised a glass. "To Hercule Poirot," he said, voice steady, "whose intellect and humanity spared me from death and preserved our trust from disgrace." The assembled company echoed the sentiment, glasses chiming in heartfelt tribute. Poirot, ever modest, simply smiled and dipped his head. May this trust endure, unbowed by threat and unbroken by spectacle. He glanced at Cromwell's apology as published in the Times that afternoon, a humble column entitled "Lessons Learned," in which Cromwell decried his own vanity and pledged to champion reasoned discourse rather than dangerous demonstrations. As the evening wound down and the hush of winter settled outside, I reflected on the day's events. The trial had demonstrated not only the necessity of law and evidence, but the capacity for mercy when repentance was sincere. The anti-dueling trust emerged stronger, its mission vindicated by public conviction that violence need not prove honour. Walking Poirot back to Baker Street under a canopy of frost-glazed lamps, I ventured a final thought. Hercule, this affair has shown that even the most sensational threat can be neutralized by steady reason and compassion. Is that the ultimate lesson? He paused beneath the flickering gaslight, moustaches quivering with satisfaction. Precisely, Hastings, that the blade which men wield in anger may be reforged into an instrument of peace, and that the little grey cells, when guided by kindness, can transform a blade's edge into a bridge between hearts. So ended the trial of sensation, issue in which a would-be assassin journalist was brought to justice. The Trust's reputation was restored, and the promise of honour without bloodshed shone brighter than any blade. And as we parted under the silent gaze of the city's watching lamps, I knew that the affair of the dueling dukes approached its final chapter, one in which the legacy of reason would outlive the echo of every rapier's ring. Chapter 11. The Oxford Symposium of Honour. The morning air at Oxford University carried a crisp solemnity as the delegation from London arrived by rail. Hercule Poirot, Mr. Hastings, Colonel Ramsay, Lady Beckingham, and the Dukes of Ashbury and Beaumont. Carriages awaited on the platform, bearing us beneath the stone archways of the Bodleian Library to the Sheldonian Theatre, its classical dome rising against a pale sky. Today marked the inaugural Symposium of Honour and Non-Violence, convened by the Anti-Dueling Trust in partnership with the university's Faculty of Ethics and Letters. I felt the tension in the air. Scholars eager to debate, dignitaries anxious to defend tradition, and beneath it all, the faint echo of past perils that Poirot had so deftly diffused. Inside the Sheldonians' hushed hall, rows of oak benches curved before a raised dais draped with the Trust's emblem, crossed-sheathed swords and an olive branch. Oil lamps glowed along the walls, illuminating stained-glass medallions of past vice-chancellors. The assembled throng comprised fellows of the colleges, officers of the Standing Committee on Public Order, and an earnest coterie of gentlemen, and ladies who had volunteered to spare their peers from needless bloodshed. Lady Beckingham, resplendent in her navy velvet cloak, trimmed with gilt embroidery, greeted guests and introduced our delegation to the Vice-Chancellor, Dr. Reginald Fitzroy, a severe man with steel-rimmed spectacles and a subtly quizzical brow. At precisely 11 o'clock, Dr. Fitzroy ascended the dais and offered a few weighty words. Gentle friends, students of life and letters, today we gather to examine a singular question. Can honour flourish without the sword's edge? The anti-duelling trust has proven that violence may be eclipsed by reason. Let our dialogue here light the path for posterity. He gestured to Lord Beaumont, who took the podium to propose the first toast, to inquiry and civility. Glasses of claret and sherry were raised. A ripple of applause greeted the resolution that the pursuit of honour should seek no mortal peril. The first address was delivered by Professor Laura Winthrop, Chair of Moral Philosophy at Balliol College. In eloquent tones, she traced duelling's history from ancient codes of chivalry to restoration pistols, demonstrating how symbolic challenges once upheld social order. But how, in modern times, they served only vanity and vengeance. She invited comparisons with tribal customs of ritual combat and argued that society's evolution demanded the substitution of debate for blood. Her closing remark, "Words not wounds must shield our reputation," resonated through the hushed chamber. Next, Colonel Ramsay presented the Trust's treatise on honour without bloodshed, a concise manual for gentlemanly dispute resolution. With measured eloquence, he reviewed the code of procedural arbitration developed by the Trust, recommending mediators, written apologies, and, where necessary, public retractions in print. He laid the treatise upon the lectern, inviting scholars to adopt it in university dispute chambers and gentlemen's clubs alike. His final exhortation, "Let compromise be the steel of our honour," elicited approving murmurs from the audience. Between the two addresses, I observed Professor Merriweather, recently released on conditional good behaviour, seated near the back, head bowed but eyes keenly alert. Later, he would deliver an impromptu critique, acknowledging his own folly in nearly endangering Colonel Ramsay. His contrition was heartfelt, and when he spoke, his voice quavered yet rang true. "Gentlemen, I was once convinced that a dramatic demonstration could clarify moral truths, but I stand before you repentant. Spectacle is no substitute for principle. Let us ensure our discourse never again relies upon blades." After Merriweather's address, the hall recessed for luncheon in adjacent refectory halls, where long tables groaned under cold meats, salads, and Oxford's famed plum cake. Glass pitchers of iced claret circulated. It was there, amid the informal conversation, that Poirot and I first noted a curious tension between two delegations. Representatives of the Society for Martial Heritage, led by Sir Percival Hargrove, and the Trust's own committee. Hargrove, a portly baronet in full civil service. "Regalia," murmured sharply to his lieutenants, his gaze flicking toward Lady Beckenham as she discussed peaceful settlement with Bishop Langley of Christ Church. "Hastings," Poirot whispered, "observe Sir Percival's rigidity. He espouses a heritage of regulated combat, yet his zeal for preservation suggests deeper rancour." I nodded, recalling Hargrove's letter to the Times defending duelling clubs as guardians of national character. He did not engage Colonel Ramsay or Professor Winthrop, and when our eyes met, he offered only a stiff nod. The afternoon session convened with a panel discussion featuring Vivaldi, the Italian fencing master, now adjustedly in academic attire, Count Geiger, his Russian reserve softened by genuine relief at the Trust's successes, and Lady Beckenham, who moderated with both wit and empathy. questions poured forth. Should the trust accede to regulated bloodless duels, with blunted, steel and formal oversight? Could universities incorporate ethical fencing as a pedagogical tool? The panel's consensus acclaimed symbolic trials, fencing, rhetorical contests and academic disputations as adequate surrogates for violence. Halfway through the panel, however, a sudden commotion erupted at the back of the hall. Sir Percival Hargrove had risen, his face crimson, and strode to the lectern, seizing its edge. "Madam Beckingham, I protest. You and your compatriots would strip this nation of its martial virtues." He brandished a rolled parchment as though it were a stiletto. A hush fell so deep one might have heard the flick of a gauntlet. Poirot rose, moustaches quivering with alarm. Lady Beckingham held up a placating hand. "Sir Percival, please be seated," she said calmly. "Your society's heritage may yet find place among our methods, but we cannot excuse the shedding of blood." Hargrove's glare softened to frustration. "Words are but shadows. Action alone reveals true character." He slammed the parchment, actually the Society's charter, upon the lectern. Poirot seized the moment. He rose and advanced to the lectern, baring his slender hands. "Sir Percival, may I ask to see that document?" With a nod, Hargrove relinquished it. Poirot unrolled it and squinted at the fine script. With deliberate slowness, he removed a jeweller's loop from his waistcoat and examined the seal. His little grey cells churning, Poirot turned to the audience. "Gentle friends, I beg your patience. I believe, Sir Percival, you have here the charter of the Society for Martial Heritage, but forged." The gasps echoed through the hall. Poirot laid the parchment flat and pointed to the crest, an impression of the Society's seal. Yet the heraldic lion's paw was misaligned. Sir Percival's face reddened further. "Forgery? Absurd!" he cried. "This is our original charter from 1872. Poirot tapped the seal gently. "Observe how the wax is a different hue from the genuine Society seal we examined yesterday. Too pale, too brittle. Moreover, the IG paper's watermark corresponds to stationery purchased by Mr. Cromwell in the week of the pavilion incident. I suspect someone has doctored this charter to lend your tradition false weight." Silence fell. Hargrove's associates exchanged anxious glances. Lady Beckingham rose. "This is most serious, Sir Percival. If your charter is forged, the Society's legitimacy is undermined." Hargrove's bravado evaporated. His shoulders slumped. I have no excuse. We found this charter in a discarded trunk and assumed it genuine. We wished to display it as proof of our lineage." He looked around, eyes brimming. "I fear we have been as reckless with our heritage as Mr. Cromwell was with a blade." Poirot closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "Let us not tarnish honour with deception. The Trust stands ready to assist your society in verifying and republishing the genuine charter, should you so request." A murmur of relief drifted through the hall. Sir Percival bowed his head in contrition. "I accept, and humbly apologise, to the symposium and to the Trust." Lady Beckingham extended her hand, and the two shook. The tension dissolved into warm applause as the moderator called the session closed. That evening, back at Beaumont Hall's guest rooms, Poirot and I sat by the fire in the library, The door closed against the chill. I poured 2 glasses of Madeira. "Mon ami," I said, "today you have not only shielded Colonel Ramsay, but also preserved the integrity of 2 venerable institutions." Poirot sipped thoughtfully. "Hastings, we have seen that honour without bloodshed requires not only the absence of violence, but the presence of truth. Forgery and spectacle alike betray the spirit of honest discourse." He tapped the arm of his chair. "The little grey cells have guided us once more through darkness to clarity." I raised my glass. "To truth, Hercule, the sharpest blade of all." He smiled, moustaches quivering. "And to honour reimagined, so that no man shall stand before another's point of steel." Thus concluded the Oxford Symposium of Honour, in which the Trust expanded its mission, confronted a fresh challenge to its credibility, and reaffirmed that, beneath every code of violence, the quiet power of truth and compassion endures, sharper than any rapier's edge. Chapter 12. The Last Duel. Averted a chill. February fog clung to Whitehall as I stepped from my cab before the Houses of Parliament. Today, the Anti-Duelling Trust was to witness the second reading of the Duelling Abolition Bill, a measure drafted in the aftermath of Oxford's Symposium, and now shepherded through the Lords by Lord Beaumont and Lord Ashbury. Though enthusiasts of chivalric tradition had softened, there remained a final nucleus of opposition, determined to preserve the honourable duel by any means. As I crossed the courtyard toward the Peers' lobby, I felt the familiar tremor of anticipation. One last challenge awaited, and only Hercule Poirot's little grey cells could ensure its defeat. Inside the columned chamber, a handful of peers, clerks, and the Trust's delegates gathered beneath the vast gilt ceiling. Lord Beaumont and Lord Ashbury sat together in the visitors' gallery, flanked by Colonel Ramsay and Lady Beckenham. I joined them just as Lord Beaumont rose to present the bill's key provisions. The outright prohibition of duelling, the recognition of symbolic fencing contests under strict regulation, and criminal penalties for challenges issued or accepted, in public or private. His voice, though measured, carried conviction. "Your lordships," he concluded, "we have seen how the blade, once liberated from necessity, became a tool of ego. It is time for Parliament to affirm that honour need never require a wound, and that disputes may be settled by reason, not by pistol or rapier." He sat amid nods of approval from the Liberal benches. Lord Ashbury followed with a brief statement of support, invoking the suffering caused by past scandals. A minor uproar greeted the opposition's spokesman, Lord Rosendale, a baronet of traditionalist views. He stood cane in hand, voice philosophic, yet insistent. "My lords, while I respect the intentions of my noble friends, there remains a question of personal honour, of the right to defend one's name. This bill risks substituting official sanction for the gentleman's code." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, and I saw Beaumont's jaw tighten. Before the debate could continue, a sharp crack echoed through the corridor. The sound of a heavy door thrown open and a single metallic report. Gasps rose as a page burst into the chamber, face pale. "My lords, a shot has been fired in Committee Room B." Pandemonium erupted. Beaumont, Ashbury, and Ramsay wheeled from their seats. I caught Poirot's sleeve. He had slipped in unnoticed behind us. His moustaches twitched. "Hastings, we must haste to that room. There may be another wounded man." We threaded through the milling officers and clerks, descending the stone steps to the committee corridor. All doors lay closed save one, the door to committee room, B, standing ajar, a smudge of soot marking its panel. Beaumont and Ashbury followed as Poirot led the way inside. The room's long table was strewn with papers, quills, and candle stubs. At the far end lay the Felaunder pistol, an antique duellist's revolver, its single barrel still warm, a thin wisp of smoke rising. No body lay upon the carpet, yet 2 witnesses flanked a corner. The clerk of the committee, Mr. St. John, clutching his chest, and Lady Rosendale's maid, pale and quivering. "What happened?" Colonel Ramsay demanded, kneeling beside St. John. The clerk gasped, pointing to a bullet hole in the door's panel and to the pistol. "I opened to fetch more vellum, and it fell from the arm of Lord Rosendale. When I bent to pick it up, it discharged, but no one was harmed." His eyes flickered to the maid. "I thought to impress my mistress with the gravity of this day. Her ladyship's duty, of course." His voice trailed off. Poirot's gaze swept the chamber. He approached the door's panel and examined the splintered wood. One shot, unplanned. The pistol did not discharge by accident. It was cocked and set to single action. He turned to Lady Rosendale's maid. "Mademoiselle, what happened to your mistress?" Under Poirot's calm interrogation, she confessed that Lady Rosendale had indeed entered moments before, intending to retrieve her ladyship's petition against the bill. She had worn the pistol concealed in her muff, an impulsive gesture to underline her determination. But shocked by the clerk's appearance, she had dropped the weapon in haste. The clerk, believing it abandoned, had picked it up, and it had discharged when his finger brushed the trigger. A collective sigh passed through the group. No violent conspiracy, but a near tragedy born of desperation. Poirot retrieved the pistol and eyed the chamber's windows. "It is fortunate that no one was injured. Still, Parliament's decorum has been violated by a weapon's presence." He turned to Lady Rosendale, who now entered at a timid run, pale as marble. "Madam," Poirot said gently, "why did you conceal a duelling pistol in the very halls of legislation?" Tears brimmed in her eyes. "My husband and I, we believed the bill would strip us of our legacy, a symbolic act to show that the old ways could not be trampled by Act of Parliament. I meant no harm, not to anyone." Her voice cracked. "I only wanted to be heard." Poirot nodded. "Your cause need not rest upon the threat of a weapon. The very presence of this pistol might have altered the vote through fear. Now that it has been disarmed, allow your voice to speak instead." He returned the pistol to his case, securing it tightly. "Leave such demonstrations to the fencing pavilion." Lord Rosendale, upon learning of his wife's act, rushed in. He bowed his head in contrition. "My lords, I apologize for this folly. My lady's ardour has overtaken her judgment." He turned to the clerk. "St. John, if you are not harmed, I beg your forgiveness." The clerk offered a weak nod. Rosendale addressed the chamber. "In light of this incident, I withdraw all objections to the duelling abolition bill. We have seen how easily honour slips into hazard." A ripple of astonished applause greeted his concession. The clerk pressed a handkerchief to his lips, but winced when he saw no wound. "Merely a bruise, your ladyship." He sighed, relief flooding his face. "Merely a bruise." We escorted Lady Rosendale from the room, as processionals returned to the chamber for the renewed debate. In the corridor, Poirot turned to me. "Hastings, this final incident has shown that even the slightest suggestion of violence can sway minds. Yet once exposed and disarmed, it strengthens the resolve for peace." He paused, moustaches quivering. "The bill will pass without further delay." I nodded, recalling the voices gathering for the resumed vote. Back in the Lords' chamber, amid the hush of expectation, Lord Beaumont rose again. "My lords, in light of recent events, both accidental and conscious, I move that the remaining objections be withdrawn, and the dueling abolition bill be advanced without amendment." He sat, and the clerk called the names. The tally, overwhelming, in favour, was met with cheers from the gallery. The bill was read a second time, its path to law assured. That evening, a small gathering assembled at Beaumont Hall to celebrate the bill's passage. The hall's grand drawing-room glowed with candlelight as the Dukes, Lady Beckingham, Colonel Ramsay, Dr. Fitzroy of Oxford, and myself raised glasses of fine port. Lady Rosendale, repentant and gracious, offered a toast. To honour redefined, no longer bound by steel, but by the courage to speak, to listen, and to amend our ways. Her husband bowed, his proud gaze softened by the bill's triumph. Poirot, seated by the hearth, raised his cup in quiet compliment. "To truth's dominion over fear," he said, "may no man resort to the pistol or the rapier when words suffice." The company echoed the sentiment, voices blending in heartfelt accord. Later, as the guests departed under a starless sky, Poirot and I lingered in the empty hall. The echo of laughter and debate faded into the hush of corridors. I turned to him. "Hercule, the dueling abolition bill is law. Have we achieved our mission at last?" He smiled, moustaches quivering with satisfaction. "At last, Hastings, the sword is sheathed for good. The little grey cells have not only solved mysteries, but have turned the tide of history. Honour, in its noblest form, survives without a single drop of blood." And so closed the penultimate chapter in the affair of the duelling dukes, as weapons near fatal intrusion gave way to the triumph of reason, and the last barrier to peace crumbled beneath the light of truth. The era of the duel, with all its peril and pageantry, passed into memory, replaced by a new covenant, that honour lives through words, deeds, and compassion, ever guided by the sharpest blade of the mind. Chapter 13. A New Covenant in Bath 3. Months had passed since the duelling abolition bill became law, and London's frost-laden streets had given way to the first stirrings of spring when I received Lady Beckingham's elegant note. "Dear Mr. Hastings, it gives me great pleasure to invite you and Monsieur Poirot to Bath, where the Anti-Duelling Trust will inaugurate its first provincial branch at the Assembly Rooms on the 12th of April. Your presence would grace the occasion. Yours faithfully, Marguerite Beckingham." I found Poirot in his study, meticulously polishing the little box that now held the Philander pistol and the 2 pavilion rapiers, tokens of our triumph. He looked up, moustaches quivering. "Bath, Hastings, the first branch beyond London, a true measure of our success. Let us attend without delay." 2 days later, we boarded the morning express from Paddington. The train's whistle and the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks provided a fitting. Prelude to the inauguration of peace. Poirot, ever attentive, surveyed our fellow passengers. A group of young colonial officers eager to debate fencing regulations, 2 ladies in brocade travelling to consult spa physicians, and a silent gentleman in corner seat who lifted his hat. In polite greeting. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot murmured. "Even the adversity of distance cannot cool the ardour for honour reformed." I smiled and stretched as the countryside slipped by. Rolling green fields, lambs gambolling in clover, and the honeyed stone of Cotswold cottages. By mid-afternoon we alighted at Bath Spa Station, where filtered sunlight glinted off puddles on the cobblestones. A carriage awaited, drawn by a chestnut mare, whose bells jingled as we passed the Roman baths and neoclassical crescents. The city's honeyed facades rose before us, warm against a pale blue sky. At the Assembly Rooms, Lady Beckingham, Lord Beaumont, Lord Ashbury, and Colonel Ramsay received us with cordial warmth. The grand portico, supported by Corinthian columns, echoed with the murmur of guests. Local magistrates, university dons from Bristol, and representatives of the Society for Martial Heritage, now reconciled to the Trust's mission. Inside, the circular room's mirrored walls and crystal chandeliers reflected a swirl of silken gowns and frock coats. Lady Beckingham took my arm. "I am delighted you have come," she said, her eyes bright. "This ceremony will affirm that the Trust's covenant extends to every part of Britain." She guided me to the dais, where a bronze plaque had been mounted. "Anti-Dueling Trust, Bath Branch founded. April 12th, 1925." Lord Beaumont stepped forward with a speech polished by both conviction and compassion. He recalled the duel's dark genesis at Ashbury Court and the bill's passage in Parliament, urging Bath citizens to champion non-violent dispute resolution. "Let this branch serve as beacon to the West Country," he concluded, "that honour may endure without violence." Applause rolled through the chamber like summer thunder. Next, Lady Ashbury, recently returned from a tour of northern industrial towns, spoke of the Trust's plans for regional arbitration courts, staffed by volunteers drawn from local gentry and professionals skilled in mediation. She described how minor disputes, diplomatic quarrels, academic rivalries, even the occasional slight at the cricket pitch, would find peaceful remedy. "Our covenant," she said, "binds us as surely as any bond of steel." The final speaker was Professor Winthrop, whose treatise on martial history had become the standard text at Oxford. She unveiled the Bath Symposium's schedule. Lectures on the ethics of conflict, demonstrations of peace fencing with blunt blades, and workshops teaching persuasive rhetoric. Words, when well chosen, cut deeper than any blade. She asserted, and the audience rose to ovation. Amid the ceremony, I scanned the crowd and noted familiar faces. Count Geiger, his Russian reserve now punctuated by a gentle smile, Professor Merriweather nervously clutching his pamphlet, and Sir Percival Hargrove, who offered only a wry nod, no doubt chastened by the charter forgery uncovered at Oxford. Even Benjamin Cromwell, released after his suspended sentence and, now free of sensational ambitions, stood in the rear, hat in hand. His gaze met mine, and he inclined his head in thanks. The formalities concluded, Lady Beckingham led us to the Mills tea room for refreshments. Bath buns, tiny cucumber sandwiches, and Darjeeling tea poured from sterling silver pots. The chatter hummed with optimism. Colonel Ramsay recounted his recovery. "Naught but a bruise, my dear Hastings," and declared himself fit for the Trust's provincial fencing exhibitions. He invited me to serve as his sous officer in a demonstration that afternoon, the lower terrace overlooking the River Avon. After luncheon, a procession moved to the terrace, where 2 small platforms had been erected. Ramsay faced a local fencing master, Mr. Edward Milton, in a peace bout. Blunted foils, protective jackets, and timed exchanges designed to teach defensive techniques. Poirot and I took our seats among the spectators. University undergraduates, civil servants, and curious townsfolk. With each measured lunge and parry, the crowd murmured approval. An entirely new spectacle, yet one more thrilling than any mortal duel. Between engagements, I overheard 2 barristers discussing the bill's next stage in the Commons, where amendments for colonial enforcement would be debated. One predicted that Dominion governments would soon pass similar legislation. "The Trust's influence spreads faster than any dueling pistol," he observed. As the sun began its slow descent toward the west, Poirot and I strolled along the terrace. The spire of Bath Abbey rose behind us, and the waters of the Avon shimmered below. "Hastings," Poirot said quietly, "today we have witnessed the transformation of a tradition once steeped in blood into a school of sport and reason. The provincial branch, the peace fencing, the college lectures, all these form the girdle of our covenant." He smiled, moustaches quivering with satisfaction. "And tomorrow we rest, and then, like any good blade, we are sharpened anew for the next calling." I nodded. "Do you think the Trust will continue to flourish?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It must, Hastings. For the spirit of honour resides not in the edge of steel, but in the courage to listen, to yield, and to speak with conviction. The little grey cells have guided us thus far, but it will be the many grey cells of country gentlemen, matronly ladies, and spirited youth that carry this covenant forward." That evening, at the grand dinner in the pump room, Poirot sat between Lady Beckenham and Professor Winthrop, while I joined Colonel Ramsay and Count Geiger. The conversation flowed from theological debates on the nature of courage to lighter topics: Bath's medicinal waters, the upcoming agricultural fair, and a lively exchange of quotations from the Trust's treatise. As Cherry's Jubilee was served, courtesy of the Assembly Room's chefs, I caught sight of Sir Percival Hargrove standing alone by a window, gazing at the moonlit terraces. Lady Beckenham approached him, offering a cup of custard, and gently drew him into conversation. I heard her say, "Your society's heritage will find new life here, Sir Percival, reimagined, not erased." He nodded, and I sensed that the final embers of resistance were at last extinguished. Later, Poirot and I retired to our lodgings at the Rovers' Return Inn, a cheerful hostelry lined with oak beams and fireside benches, over steaming cups of posset made with ale, bread, and nutmeg. We reflected on the journey from that first challenge in London to Bath's covenant renewed. "Mon ami," Poirot mused, "our case of the duelling dukes has unfolded into something far greater, a movement that redefines honour for an age that has outgrown bloodshed." He tapped his teacup. "We have seen opponents become partners, threats become teaching moments, and steel forged into fellowship." He paused, moustaches quivering. I dare say the trust will flourish in every county across this realm. I raised my cup to the Anti-Duelling Trust and to its first provincial branch, Hastings and Commons Edition. He chuckled, tapping the rim of his cup to mine. And to the little grey cells of thousands who will carry this covenant forward. As the fire crackled and the moonlight filtered through the casement, I felt the full circle of our adventure. From pistol duels in hidden moors to fencing demonstrations on Bath's terraces, from clandestine forgeries to public legislation, from venomous threats to scholarly debate. In the gentle hush that followed, Poirot turned to me, his eyes reflecting both mischief and melancholy. Hastings, every case must end, and every triumph be followed by new inquiries. But for tonight, let us rest content in the knowledge that at least once honour has triumphed without a single drop of blood, and so, under Bath's soft starlight, where sober architecture meets the whisper of ancient waters, we closed the penultimate chapter in Hercule Poirot and the affair of the duelling dukes. What remained was the final chapter, the epilogue of legacy, in which the whisper of this extraordinary adventure would echo through generations to come. Chapter 14. The Council of Honour. Bright spring sunlight flooded the marble courtyard of Ashbury Court as guests began to assemble for this day's most auspicious event. The inaugural meeting of the Council of Honour, convened under the joint aegis of the Anti-Duelling Trust and the houses of Ashbury and Beaumont. Oil lanterns and bunting fluttered from the balustrades. The ivy-clad walls echoed with the distant sound of a string quartet rehearsing in the east wing. From the portico, Lord Beaumont, resplendent in a blue frock coat with silver braid, and Lord Ashbury, in a forest green morning coat, greeted arriving dignitaries, junior peers, university lecturers, retired officers, and representatives of provincial branches. Colonel Callum Ramsay stood at Beaumont's side, inspecting the preparations with the eye of a man still a soldier at heart, while Lady Marguerite Beckingham, radiant in pale lilac, welcomed guests with a graceful word and a courteous smile. Behind them, a black marble plinth supported the newly unveiled Medallion of Honour, a silver disc bearing the Trust's emblem, encircled by the words non virtus sanguine, sed verbo. Not by blood, but by word shall honour endure. Arrived with Monsieur Poirot just as the clock in the tower chimed 11. Poirot's moustaches twitched in evident pleasure at the turnout. "Hastings," he whispered, "from a duel on moorland to a council in this courtyard. What a remarkable transformation!" I nodded, surveying the assembled company, and noted familiar faces, Count Geiger in deep burgundy velvet, Professor Laura Winthrop, her notes clasped in a leather folio, Sir Percival Hargrove, now a patron of the Trust's Martial Heritage Branch, and tucked discreetly at the back, Benjamin Cromwell, penitent yet welcomed as a charter member. At precisely 11:30, Lady Beckingham ascended the dais and tapped gently on a silver gong. The quartet fell silent. Conversation hushed. She stepped forward, voice clear and resonant. Distinguished friends, colleagues in peace and scholarship, and champions of honour redefined, welcome to the first session of the Council of Honour. Today we mark not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a legacy. May our deliberations guide men and women across this realm, away from the temptation of arms, to the power of reason. Applause rippled through the crowd, and Poirot offered an arch smile. Ashbury and Beaumont joined her on the dais. Beaumont took the podium. Friends, our council stands to codify the principles we have championed. Arbitration in place of combat, debate in place of duels, and fellowship in place of fear. We shall issue guidelines for gentlemanly and gentlewomanly conduct, adapt our Oxford treatise for civic study, and appoint mediators across every county. Ashbury followed with equal dignity. We also propose the founding of a museum of martial heritage, housed within these very walls, to preserve relics of past practices, pistols, rapier hilts, and duels rolls, but presented not in celebration, but in solemn remembrance. May the spectres of conflict serve as cautionary tutors rather than models to be emulated. The council's first order of business was the election of officers. Nominations were called from the floor, and by acclamation, Colonel Ramsay was named Protector of Protocols. Professor Winthrop became Secretary of Ethical Studies. Count Geiger assumed the title of Master of Artisanal Arms, tasked with certifying all blades exhibited, and Sir Percival Hargrove, in a gesture of reconciliation, was elected Curator of Heritage Artifacts. Each received a ribbon and medal insignia, small tokens of a movement both earnest and elegant. Between the formal proceedings, Hastings and Combs' own representatives manned a reception table where pamphlets and copies of the Trust's manual were distributed. I watched as local magistrates and ministers of education requested bulk orders for their shires and boroughs. The seeds sown in Bath and Oxford had found fertile soil even here, at the home of the duelling dukes. When the business of the day concluded, Lady Beckingham invited all to partake in a luncheon under the elms, a banquet served upon trestle tables, of roast lamb, minted peas, and crusty loaves, finished with lemon posset and elderflower cake. Under a canopy of fresh green leaves, conversation turned from statutes to stories. Professor Merriweather recounted his own dramatic rehearsal of a duel in Cambridge. Count Geiger demonstrated the difference between a rapier's point control and a sabre's draw cut, on a melon, to universal delight. And Colonel Ramsay led a small fencing tableau for the children of staff members, using blunt foils as scarves in a game of friendly touch. At the height of merriment, Lord Beaumont rose, glass in hand, commanding attention with his characteristic poise. "To the Council of Honour," he declared, "to the Museum of Martial Heritage, and to every man and woman who believes that courage is measured by the strength of one's convictions, not by the steel at one's side." Glasses clinked. The quartet struck a joyous chord. Even the children of Ashbury Court joined in a chorus of cheers. It was a moment of pure communion. Social order restored, tradition reinterpreted, and a new charter of civility sealed in fellowship. Yet beneath the festive air, Poirot remained watchful. Toward the far end of the clearing, I caught his eye as he observed a slender figure gliding between the trees. I followed his gaze to a cloaked guest whose face remained concealed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The figure paused beside the medallion of honour, touching it reverently, then slipped back into the shadows. Poirot nudged me. "Our affair is not quite complete, Hastings. That shadow may bear a final message." As Beaumont circulated among his guests, Poirot rose and beckoned me to slip away quietly. Together we crossed the lawn in the dappled light to where the cloaked figure had stood. There, beneath the moss-clad base of the plinth, we discovered a small folded note, pinned with a silver dagger emblem. Poirot retrieved it with a glance that betrayed both caution and amusement. Unfolding the vellum, he read aloud in a hushed tone, "Honour endures not in laws alone, but in the vigilance of the just. May your counsel guard against pride's soft whisper, lest it sharpen into the old blade." A friend. We looked around. No soul walked the sunlit terrace, save for a white cat that slipped beneath the hedges. Poirot refolded the note and slipped it into his waistcoat pocket. "Even in triumph, mon ami," he murmured, "a detective must heed the rumble of unseen currents. Pride and complacency can dull the keenest edge of virtue." We returned to the luncheon with discreet alacrity. I joined Colonel Ramsay, who offered me a second helping of roasted lamb. "All is well?" he asked with a wink. I tapped my nose. "All is well, Colonel. Better than well, in fact." The afternoon waned, and the assembly rooms emptied. We bade farewell to Lady Beckingham and the Dukes, promising to return for the museum's opening later in the season. Boarding our carriage once more, Poirot gazed back at the golden stone of Bath, where the Council of Honour now stood watch over a transformed England. That evening, under a harvest moon rising above the Cotswolds, we travelled southward, the wheels of the carriage echoing upon moonlit lanes. Inside, Poirot spoke quietly. "Hastings, a covenant born in conflict, must ever renew itself in vigilance, lest its edges grow dull. The note we found is no threat, but a reminder. The little grey cells must remain keen, for even the greatest triumph can become mere pageantry, if not tempered by humility and purpose." I looked out at the silvered landscape, and if the note's author is friend, then we have earned another ally. He tapped the windowsill gently. "Indeed, for the Council of Honour to endure, its champions must be ever watchful. And so, mon ami, our affair of the duelling dukes draws to its final chapter, one in which honour will be measured, not by duels fought, but by the justice we uphold day by day." Outside, the silver moon led us onward. Within, the promise of a new covenant shone brighter than any blade, and two detectives, both gentleman and scholar, prepared at last to close this chapter, convinced that in the war against violence, the sharpest weapon remains the truth. Chapter 15. The Legacy of Honour. The first light of dawn crept over the hills surrounding Ashbury Court, as I stood upon the terrace, gazing at the dew-spangled lawn where the Council of Honour had convened. Only the day before, the ivy on the walls glowed emerald in the weak sun, and the scent of spring blossoms drifted on a gentle breeze. In this hush, the full weight of our journey, one that had begun with whispered challenges and powder-smoke duels, settled upon me like a benediction. Here, at the heart of the Trust's birthplace, I waited for Monsieur Poirot, who had insisted upon one final inspection of the Museum of Martial Heritage before our departure. The museum, housed in the east wing of the manor, opened its doors in a modest ceremony. Under Count Geiger's curatorial eye, the display cases held relics of duellists past. An 18th-century Florentine hilt sword with a deep scratch scarred across its fuller. A pair of General Bertram's service pistols laid side by side with a plumed hat from the Crimean campaign, and most symbolically, the very Phalander pistol that had nearly turned Colonel Ramsay's demonstration into tragedy. Each artifact was accompanied by a placard not of celebration, but of caution, reminders of the perils men once embraced in the name of honour. I entered beside Colonel Ramsay, now fully recovered, and looking remarkably hale in his evening tailcoat. He paused before the instrument of his near death, touching the glass with a reverent finger. "Remarkable," he murmured, "to see this in a glass case. I feel as though I stand beyond danger's reach now." I nodded. Yet its presence teaches us that history must neither be forgotten nor glorified. At that moment, Poirot emerged from the antechamber, his moustaches quivering with satisfaction. Clutched in his hand was a small sealed envelope, the final flourish of our unfolding drama. He broke the seal and read aloud, "May every visitor who beholds these blades remember that true honour is forged not by the pressure of steel upon flesh, but by the pressure of conscience upon the heart." A friend. His eyes flicked to me with a private delight. "Hastings, our anonymous ally, offers the perfect coda. Honour, once stained by the blade, is here reclaimed by the word." He replaced the note in Poirot's silver case, and then guided Colonel Ramsay and me through each hall, pointing out how the exhibits told not one story of bravado, but many of regret, reconciliation, and renewal. We paused before the centrepiece, the Council's Medallion of Honour, suspended beneath a dome of glass. Its silver sheen caught the morning rays, and the inscription, "Non virtus sanguine sed verbo," seemed to breathe with life. Lady Beckenham joined us, her violet cloak whispering on the marble floor. "It is more than a medal," she said softly. "It is the promise we make to each other, to choose dialogue over duels, to listen rather than lash out." Her gaze lingered on the medallion before trailing to Poirot. "And to the detective who taught us that every challenge, no matter how fierce, can find its resolution in reason." I felt a gentle tug on my sleeve, and turned to see Count Geiger offering me a small volume. "For you, Mr. Hastings," he said. "My own tribute, a treatise on the art of the blade, revised to emphasize defensive technique and respect for one's opponent." I accepted it gratefully, running my fingers over the embossed cover. "Thank you," I said. "I shall treasure it, and keep its lessons close." As the soft strains of the string quartet filled the hall beyond, we made our way back to the terrace, where the Trust's governors had arranged a morning collation of Earl Grey tea and Bath buns. The company mingled in bright conversation, Professor Winthrop debating the merits of rhetorical duels, Sir Percival Hargrove describing his next project to catalogue local duelling inscriptions for posterity, and Benjamin Cromwell, who now moderated a discussion on ethical journalism, confined at last to the pen he once aspired to elevate at the cost of human life. Monsieur Poirot stood apart, observing the scene with his habitual balance of engagement and detachment. I joined him, leaning on the wrought-iron balustrade. "Mon ami," I ventured, "we have seen a great transformation, from powder and pistols to pamphlets and protocols. Do you think the Trust will endure beyond our watch?" His green eyes softened. "Hastings, an institution built upon reason and compassion, is more durable than any castle of stone. The little grey cells have sparked its creation, but it is the many bright minds, scholars, soldiers, statesmen, who shall carry this covenant forward. I took a moment to let the scene breathe into my memory. The laughter of children learning peace fencing on the lawn below. The quiet reverence of visitors tracing war-scarred blades behind glass. The warm sunshine that felt like the world's blessing on our cause. Then, resolute, I asked, "And us, mon ami? Where do we go from here?" Poirot tapped the ridge of his rapier case. A gift from Colonel Ramsay, now emblazoned with the Trust's colours. Onward, Hastings. There are always new puzzles, fresh enigmas waiting in London's fog and beyond. But for this day, let us bask in the glow of accomplishment. He paused. And tomorrow, if you wish, we shall resume our ordinary lives, until destiny calls us once more. As the bells of Bath Abbey pealed across the courtyard, I smiled, feeling the weight of history settle into a promise. The affair of the duelling dukes, so fraught with peril, so steeped in tradition, had yielded to a new era, one in which honour was not proved by blood, but preserved by the bond of words. And in the heart of Ashbury Court, amid relics of vanquished folly, the silver medallion shone bright as a beacon, a testament to the power of reason, the triumph of compassion, and the enduring artistry of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells.